A billionaire can buy an entire airline. But that night, at Gate 14 of JFK Airport, the one thing he could not buy was the way she looked straight into his eyes and said, "No, thank you." And that single refusal changed everything. This is the story of a man who had everything the world could offer, except the one thing he actually needed, and a woman who had almost nothing, except the kind of courage most people only read about in books. If you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button, stay until the very end, because I promise you, the moment that broke Damien Ashcroft wide open is not the moment you're expecting. The fluorescent lights inside Terminal 4 had that particular cruelty that only airports seem to manage. Bright enough to see every crack in the plastic seats, harsh enough to drain the color out of every human face passing beneath them. It was 11:40 at night, and the terminal smelled like burnt coffee, luggage rubber, and the specific kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's bones when they've been awake too long and haven't eaten enough. Damien Ashcroft stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, a phone pressed to his ear, watching a cargo plane taxi slowly through the dark. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in a black car somewhere on the Van Wyck Expressway, heading back to Manhattan, back to his penthouse on the 53rd floor, back to the 57 unread emails that his assistant had already flagged as urgent. He was supposed to have been on the 7:15 to London, a board meeting, a merger negotiation with 3 hospital systems in the UK that had been 18 months in the making. Instead, he was standing in an airport terminal at midnight because his daughter had called him crying. Not the dramatic kind of crying, not the screaming, inconsolable kind, the quiet kind, which was always worse. Lily had called from her boarding school in Connecticut, 7 years old and already too proud to ask for things directly, and she'd said she had a stomachache and she just wanted to hear his voice. That was all. Just his voice. And Damien had stood in the jetway with his briefcase in his hand and his boarding pass already scanned, and he had walked back off the plane. His assistant Marcus had not even tried to argue. He'd seen it coming before Damien had. So now Damien was standing in Terminal 4 with no immediate flight, no particular urgency, and a large black coffee growing cold in his left hand while he listened to Marcus run through tomorrow's rescheduled itinerary on the phone. Outside, a light rain had started against the windows. The reflections blurred. "Push the London meeting to Thursday," Damien said, "and call Dr. Reeves at Lily's school. Tell her I want a full update on the stomach thing by 8 a.m. Not a message, a call." "Already done," Marcus said. "The car is downstairs whenever you're ready." Damien didn't answer right away. He was watching something across the terminal. There was a woman sitting against the far wall between a closed Hudson News and a darkened gate counter. She sat very still in the way that people sit when they are trying not to take up too much space in the world. Her coat, a dark navy thing that was a full season too thin for late November, was folded neatly across her lap. A single carry-on bag sat between her feet, both hands wrapped around the handles like she was afraid someone might take it while she wasn't paying attention. She wasn't on a phone, she wasn't reading anything. She was simply sitting there, looking straight ahead at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone who has absorbed a very bad piece of news and is now deciding, quietly and privately, what to do next. "Damien?" Marcus said. "Yeah, I'll call you back." He hung up before Marcus could respond. Hannah Pierce had known the day was going to be difficult the moment she woke up that morning in her apartment in Delwood, Ohio. A town of 11,000 people positioned almost perfectly between nowhere and nowhere else. The apartment was actually the second floor of a house owned by her landlady, Mrs. Kwan, who kept the thermostat at 62 degrees from October through March because, as she frequently explained, she had grown up without central heating and had therefore developed a philosophical opposition to it. Hannah had set her alarm for 4:15. She'd ironed her one good blazer the night before and hung it on the back of the bathroom door so the steam from her shower would smooth out the crease near the left pocket that the iron never quite reached. She'd printed 3 copies of her resume, her portfolio, and her reference letters. She'd confirmed her flight twice. She'd looked up the address of the Meridian Health Foundation offices in Los Angeles so many times that she had the cross streets memorized. The flight to LA out of Columbus at 6:50 a.m. was supposed to connect through JFK with a 2-hour layover and land in Los Angeles at 12:30 in the afternoon. Her interview was at 3 o'clock. She'd built in enough time to take the subway from LAX, change clothes in a coffee shop bathroom if she had to, and still walk into that building looking like someone who belonged there. She did not account for the mechanical delay in Columbus that held the plane on the ground for an hour and 40 minutes. She did not account for missing her connection at JFK by 11 minutes. And she certainly did not account for standing at the rebooking counter while a gate agent named Derek, who had the particular energy of someone whose patience had been surgically removed sometime around his third year on the job, explained to her that the next available seat on any flight to Los Angeles was tomorrow morning at 6:45 a.m., and that while he was very sorry for the inconvenience, the airline was not responsible for missed connections resulting from mechanical delays on partner carriers, and therefore no hotel voucher would be issued and no meal voucher would be issued, and the best he could do was confirm her on the morning flight at no additional charge. "So you're telling me," Hannah said slowly, "that I'm going to be here until 6:45 in the morning. That's correct? Because your plane had a mechanical problem." "A partner carrier plane," Derek said, with the specific precision of someone who had rehearsed this particular distinction. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay," picked up her bag, and walked away. She did not yell. She did not cry. She did not ask to speak to a manager, though she had the right to, and though she could feel the hard edge of that right pressing against the inside of her chest, like something she was deliberately choosing not to reach for. She walked to the far wall of the terminal, sat down on the plastic seat, folded her coat across her lap because the air conditioning was running for reasons that made no sense in November, and she sat very still and thought about what she was going to do. The interview was at 3 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow if she caught the 6:45. She would land in LA at 10:15. She had the address. She had her blazer. She could make it work. What she could not make work was the $214 in her checking account, which needed to cover the cost of food and a ride share to the interview location in Los Angeles, and which would not stretch to cover a hotel room in New York City for 6 hours, not even a bad one. She'd slept in airports before. It wasn't the worst thing. She pulled out her phone and called her sister back in Delwood. "Hey," she said when Renee picked up. "I'm not going to make tonight. I missed my connection." She paused. "No, I'm fine. I'm just going to stay in the terminal. The morning flight's confirmed." Another pause, longer this time. "Renee, I'm not borrowing $300. I'm fine." She listened for another moment, then said quietly, "I'll call you when I land," and hung up. She sat there for a while without moving. Around her, the terminal was emptying out. The last gate to her left had cleared 30 minutes ago, and the agents had turned off the monitors and gone somewhere else. The cleaning crew had come through with their carts and gone. A man in a gray uniform was now slowly pushing a mop in wide arcs at the far end of the corridor, his movements rhythmic and indifferent. She reached into her bag and pulled out a granola bar, the last one from the 3-pack she'd bought at the Columbus airport, which felt like it had been in a different lifetime. And she ate it slowly, staring at the rain sliding down the big windows. She had one interview, one. The Meridian Health Foundation's fellowship program was one of the most competitive healthcare administration programs in the country, and she had spent 11 months getting to this point. 11 months of night classes after double shifts at the Riverside Urgent Care Clinic. 11 months of writing and rewriting her application essay at the kitchen table after midnight while Mrs. Kwan's cat yowled at something in the backyard. 11 months of people asking her, gently or not so gently, whether this was really realistic, given everything. Given everything. She knew what that meant. It meant her age, which was 30, and which some people seemed to feel was somehow already too late to want something different from what she had. It meant her education, which had come in fragments, community college, then a 2-year certification, then night classes, none of it adding up to the kind of clean linear resume that the Meridian program usually looked for. It meant the 5 years she'd spent working 2 jobs while her mother was sick, because someone had to, and the debt that still sat in her bank account like a permanent guest she'd stopped arguing with. None of that was going to stop her from being in that building at 3 p.m. tomorrow. She was certain of that in the same way she was certain about very few things. Not with bravado, but with a kind of flat, immovable conviction that had nothing to do with optimism. She tucked the granola bar wrapper into the small front pocket of her bag and leaned her head back against the wall. Damien watched her for about 45 seconds before he caught himself doing it and looked away. It wasn't the way he watched a business presentation or a market report, that focused, extractive attention he'd developed over 15 years of running companies. It was something quieter than that, and it surprised him, which was itself surprising, because very few things surprise Damien Ashcroft anymore. He walked to the coffee kiosk near the center of the terminal, the only one still open, staffed by a teenager named Josh, who was doing calculus homework on a yellow legal pad between customers, and bought 2 coffees. He wasn't sure why he bought 2. He stood there for a moment holding them both, which was the kind of thing Marcus would have found deeply amusing. He walked toward the far wall. She noticed him coming before he was halfway there. He could tell because her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders pulled back a fraction, chin leveled, the specific adjustment of someone who has learned to remain composed when they'd rather not be observed. He stopped about 6 feet away from her seat, which felt like the respectful distance, and he held out one of the coffees. "You look like you've been waiting a while," he said. It wasn't charming. It wasn't particularly clever. It was just the true thing. She looked at the coffee, then she looked at him. "I'm fine," she said. "But thank you." "It's just coffee," he said. "I bought 2 by accident." She looked at the coffee again. Then she said, "Nobody buys 2 coffees by accident." He almost smiled. "No," he admitted. "They don't." There was a beat of silence. She didn't take the coffee. She also didn't look away, which he found he respected. "Damien Ashcroft," he said. "I know who you are," she said. Not unkindly, just flatly, the way you state a fact. "Then you know I'm probably not going to rob you." "Most people who end up robbing you," she said, "you didn't think were going to." He stood there for another second. Then he said, "Can I sit down? I'll keep the coffee." She looked at the row of empty seats stretching in both directions as far as either of them could see, and then she looked back at him with an expression that said very plainly, "There are 40 seats available to you right now." "Sure," she said anyway. He sat down 2 seats over, which again felt like the appropriate distance. He put both coffees on the seat between them in case she changed her mind. "Missed connection?" he asked. "Mechanical delay out of Columbus?" She paused. "Missed it by 11 minutes. "Where are you headed?" "Los Angeles." She said it without elaborating, and he didn't push. "When's the next one?" 6:45 a.m. He nodded slowly. He did the math without meaning to. It was an occupational habit, running numbers before he was fully conscious of doing it. 6:45 a.m. was roughly 7 hours away. "There's a hotel inside the terminal," he said, "connected to the sea gates, reasonably quiet." "I'm aware," she said. He looked at her. She didn't add anything. "Miss Pierce," she said. "Hannah Pierce." "Miss Pierce." He picked up one of the coffees and turned it in his hands. "I'm going to say something directly, and I'd appreciate it if you heard the whole thing before responding." She said nothing, which he interpreted as permission. "I have a company credit card and a habit of spending money on things that seem useful," he said. "The hotel connected to Terminal C is $400 a night, which I recognize is an absurd amount of money for a room you'd sleep in for 5 hours. It's also a room you'd sleep in for 5 hours instead of sitting in that chair all night." He paused. "I'm not saying this because I feel sorry for you. I'm saying it because it seems like an obvious problem with an obvious solution that happens to cost me nothing I would notice." Hannah looked at him steadily for a long moment. "You don't know me," she said. "No." "You don't know why I'm going to Los Angeles?" "No." "You don't know anything about me except that I'm sitting in an airport at midnight and I didn't take your coffee." "That's correct," he said. "Then why?" He thought about it. Not the way people think about things when they're constructing an answer, but the way they think when they're trying to locate the honest version of something. "Because you looked like you were handling something hard," he finally said, "and you were doing it quietly. And I have a daughter who I'm trying to teach that things worth doing are often worth doing quietly." He paused. It felt like the kind of thing I'd want someone to do for her, if she ever needed it. Hannah Pierce looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that takes a person apart one layer at a time, politely but thoroughly. "That's actually a decent answer," she said. Thank you. I'm still not taking the hotel room. Okay, he said. She looked slightly surprised that he didn't argue. He picked up his coffee and drank it. They sat in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that happens between two people who have each decided, independently, that the other one is probably not dangerous. "Why are you still here?" she asked eventually. "You don't have a flight." "No." "Your car's downstairs?" He glanced at her. "Marcus told you that?" "Nobody told me anything. You've been on your phone, you obviously didn't come in from outside because you don't have luggage, and you're wearing a suit at midnight that doesn't have a single wrinkle in it, which means you haven't been sitting anywhere. You were walking around." She paused. "And you just said Marcus, so I'm assuming that's your assistant and not your invisible friend." He set down his coffee. "You're observant." "I work in a clinic," she said. I work at a clinic. You learn to notice things fast." "What kind of clinic?" She hesitated. The small hesitation of someone deciding how much to give away. "Urgent care, and before that, home care. I've done a lot of different things." "But you're going to Los Angeles for something specific." "Yes." He waited. She didn't elaborate. "Fair enough," he said. The rain against the windows had gotten heavier. Somewhere down the terminal, a janitor's cartwheel squeaked rhythmically against the tile floor. A gate agent at the far end was shutting down a monitor, the screen going dark with a soft click. "Your daughter," Hannah said after a while. "That's why you got off the plane." He looked at her. "You said you were supposed to be somewhere tonight," she said, "and you mentioned a daughter, and you said you were trying to teach her things." She paused. People don't talk about what they're teaching their kids unless their kids are on their mind, and people don't mention their kids in passing like that unless something just happened. He was quiet for a moment. "She called me from school. She had a stomachache." "How old?" 7. Hannah nodded slowly. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said, "My mom used to say that a stomachache in a kid is almost never just a stomachache. She was right." "Was?" "She passed 4 years ago." Hannah nodded, and this time the nod had something different in it. A recognition that wasn't sympathy exactly, but something older than sympathy. "Mine too," she said. 2 years ago." He didn't say he was sorry. She'd heard that enough. Instead, he just said, "It changes things." "Yes," she said. "It does." They sat with that for a moment. "Lily," he said. "My daughter's name is Lily." "That's a good name." "Her mother chose it." He said it without drama, just the flat fact of it. "She died when Lily was 14 months old. Aneurysm, no warning." Hannah turned to look at him directly. He was staring at the rain on the windows, his coffee held loosely in both hands, his expression doing the thing that faces do when someone is saying something true that they don't say often. "I'm sorry," she said. She meant it in the way you can tell someone means it, not as a social reflex, but as a real thing, delivered with weight. "It was a long time ago," he said. Then he paused. "It was also not that long ago, depending on the day." "Yeah," Hannah said quietly. "I know that." Around 1 in the morning, the terminal got quiet enough that you could hear the heating system running in the walls. Hannah had shifted slightly in her seat, her coat now wrapped around her shoulders rather than folded in her lap, and she was drinking the coffee that Damien had left on the seat between them, which she'd picked up about 20 minutes after their initial conversation had settled into something less guarded. She hadn't acknowledged picking it up. Neither had he. They'd talked about small things, mostly. The particular misery of airline food. Whether the Columbus airport was better or worse than the Cleveland airport, a debate in which Hannah held firm opinions, and Damien had no useful opinions whatsoever because, as he admitted without any particular self-consciousness, he had used his own terminal for years. She'd given him a look at that. "You have your own terminal," she said. "It's a hangar, technically." "Right," she said. "Technically." She said it without venom, which he appreciated. He'd had a version of this conversation before, with business partners, with dates, once with a therapist he'd seen briefly in his early 30s, and it usually went one of two ways. Either people became more deferential when confronted with the reality of his wealth, or they became combative about it. Hannah Pierce did neither. She simply filed it and moved on, like a piece of information that was mildly interesting but didn't change anything about how she was going to conduct herself. He found it genuinely disorienting, in a way he hadn't expected. Around 1:30, an older woman, late 70s, traveling alone, with the slightly confused look of someone who had been awake longer than her body approved of, settled into a seat about 15 feet down from them, pulling a small cooler bag onto her lap and fumbling with its zipper. Hannah glanced over. Damien noticed her glance. "She was at my gate in Columbus," Hannah said quietly. "Mrs. Kowalski. She mentioned she was going to visit her daughter in California. She has diabetes. She told me about it while we were waiting for the tarmac delay. She was worried about the timing of her medications." Damien looked at the older woman. "She seems okay." "She seemed okay 20 minutes ago, too." Hannah paused. "She's been sitting there for about 8 minutes, and she hasn't been able to get that zipper open." Her hands were fine at the Columbus gate. He looked at her. She was already getting up. She walked over to Mrs. Kowalski with the specific kind of unhurried purpose that doesn't alarm people, not rushing, not calling attention to herself, just moving in a straight line towards something that needed doing. "Mrs. Kowalski," she said, sitting down next to her. "It's Hannah. We were in Columbus together." The older woman looked up, and Damien could see from across the terminal that her face was different from the way it had been at the gate. Slightly slack on one side, eyes not quite focusing. "Oh," Mrs. Kowalski said. Her voice came out thicker than it should have. "Yes, I'm having a little trouble with—" "That's okay," Hannah said. "Can I look in your bag? You told me your kit was in there." "My kit, yes. I can't seem to—" Hannah had the zipper open in 2 seconds. She was already pulling out the glucometer with one hand, while her other hand found the woman's wrist, not dramatically, just found it. The way you reach for something you know exactly where it is. "When did you eat last?" Hannah asked, her voice completely level. "I had... on the plane from... the pretzels, I think. Hours ago. I'm sorry. I can't..." "You don't need to be sorry," Hannah said. "Hold still for just a second." The finger prick. The small bead of blood. The glucometer reading. Hannah looked at the number, and Damien watched her face do something controlled and fast. A recalibration. A decision being made without visible deliberation. "Okay," she said to Mrs. Kowalski. "You're very low right now. Do you have glucose tablets in here?" In the small pocket." "Got them." She had the bottle open. "I need you to chew 3 of these for me, slowly. Can you do that?" "Is something wrong with me?" "You're going to be completely fine," Hannah said. "I just need you to eat these and sit still for a few minutes. I'm going to stay right here." Damien had already crossed the terminal. He crouched down on the other side of Mrs. Kowalski without being asked. "Should I call for medical?" he said quietly to Hannah. She considered it for exactly 2 seconds. He could see her thinking, not panicking, thinking. "Get the gate agent to call the airport medical team, not an emergency call. A request for a paramedic on standby. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "I need them here, but I don't want her frightened more than she already is. Can you manage that?" He stood up and walked to the nearest agent station with his phone already out, and within 3 minutes he had a paramedic on the way. Quiet, no announcement, no drama. A favor called in to someone he knew in airport operations who answered on the second ring. When he came back, Mrs. Kowalski was sitting up straighter. Color was returning to her face in visible increments, like a tide coming in. Hannah was holding her hand and talking to her about her daughter in California, asking her name, asking what she did for work, asking about grandchildren. And Damien understood immediately that this was not small talk. She was testing orientation. She was keeping the woman engaged and calm while simultaneously monitoring her recovery. And she was doing it so naturally that Mrs. Kowalski clearly had no idea she was being assessed. "You have a lovely family," Hannah was saying when Damien sat back down across from them. "Your daughter sounds like a real character." "Oh, she is," Mrs. Kowalski said, and her voice was fully her own again, the slur gone, the eyes clear. "She's going to lecture me about this, you know. She tells me I never eat enough on travel days. She's right, Hannah said. From now on, set an alarm on your phone every 4 hours. It doesn't matter if you don't feel hungry. You sound like a doctor. Hannah smiled, and it was the first time Damien had seen her smile, really. It was a little crooked, and it reached her eyes, and there was something exhausted and genuine in it that had nothing to do with performance. Not a doctor, she said, just someone who's taking care of a lot of people. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, quiet and professional, and Hannah gave them a clean verbal handoff, blood glucose reading, time elapsed, glucose administered, current status, with the kind of precision and calm that made one of the paramedics look at her a moment longer than necessary. You with the medical team? He asked. No, she said. I was just nearby. She walked back to her seat. She sat down, picked up her coffee, and drank the last of it, which was by now completely cold. Her hands were perfectly steady. Damien sat down next to her. Not 2 seats away this time. 1 seat. She noticed. She didn't comment on it. That was remarkable, he said. She would have been fine if someone had found her in time, Hannah said. She was caught early. Because you were paying attention. Because she told me about her diabetes in Columbus. Hannah set the empty coffee cup down. I just remembered. You remembered, and then you watched for it for 2 hours. She was quiet. Hannah, he said. She looked at him. That wasn't luck, he said. That was skill and that was care. 2 things that are harder to find than most people realize. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked away, out at the rain on the windows, and he thought he saw something move across her face. Not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. The reluctant acknowledgement of something true. Her numbers will need monitoring for the next few hours, Hannah said. The paramedics have her. She'll be okay. I know. A long silence opened up between them, but this one was different from the earlier ones. It was warmer. Something had shifted in the air between them, some arrangement of molecules reorganized by what had just happened, and they were both sitting in it without quite knowing what to call it. The interview, Damien said, in Los Angeles. She looked at him. What is it for? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Meridian Health Foundation. Administrative Fellowship. It's a 2-year program. I know Meridian, he said. It came out neutral, just information. He did not say that 2 of Ashcroft Medical Group's hospital partnerships had overlapping interests with the Meridian Foundation. He did not say that he'd met their board chair twice. He just said he knew them. She heard the rest of it anyway, because she was Hannah Pierce, and she was apparently constitutionally incapable of missing subtext. I got there on my own, she said. It wasn't defensive, it was clear. I can see that, he said. I just want to make sure that's understood. Completely understood, he said. She nodded. Then she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes, and he understood that she was not shutting him out. She was just finally, for the first time since he'd watched her absorb that piece of bad news at the rebooking counter, allowing herself to rest. He sat beside her in the harsh fluorescent light of a nearly empty terminal, rain running down the windows in long, crooked lines, and a woman he'd met 2 hours ago breathing slowly and steadily next to him, and he thought about Lily, asleep in her dormitory bed in Connecticut, her stomachache probably faded by now, her hand tucked under her cheek the way she'd slept since she was a baby. He thought about what his daughter was going to be like at 30, what the world was going to ask of her, whether it was going to be kind or unkind, and whether he was teaching her the right things to handle either one. He looked at Hannah Pierce, asleep in an airport chair with her coat wrapped around her shoulders and her carry-on bag still tucked between her feet, handle still in her hand. He thought, I hope it makes her someone like this. And then, because he was Damien Ashcroft and he was practical above most other things, he pulled out his phone, opened the airline app, and quietly purchased 2 first-class seats on the 6:45 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. He wasn't sure yet how he was going to offer her the second one without her refusing it. He figured he had about 5 hours to work that out. She woke up before he did. That wasn't entirely accurate. Damien hadn't slept at all. He'd sat beside her in the thin airport silence, phone face down on his knee, watching the rain on the windows gradually ease into a fine mist, and then into nothing, and then into the particular gray that precedes dawn in the northeast, that colorless hour where the sky can't quite commit to being light yet. Around 4 a.m., he'd gotten up, gone to the coffee kiosk. Josh, the calculus student, had been replaced by an older woman named Deb, who moved with the unhurried competence of someone 3 hours into a shift. And he'd come back with 2 more coffees and a paper bag of food that the kiosk shouldn't technically have been selling at that hour, but apparently did anyway. When he came back, Hannah was already awake. She was sitting straight, both hands on her bag handles, hair slightly flattened on one side from leaning against the wall. She looked at him, then at the coffees, then back at him. "You were gone," she said. Not accusatory, just noting it. "Coffee run." He held one out. This time she took it immediately. He considered that a meaningful development. "What time is it?" she asked. 4:12. She nodded, running some internal calculation. The flight was at 6:45. Boarding would begin around 6:15. She had roughly 2 hours, which was enough time to find a bathroom, change her shirt. He'd noticed the small travel bag tucked into the side pocket of her carry-on and suspected she had a backup, and still sit with a cup of coffee before they called her row. He held out the paper bag. "They had some kind of breakfast sandwich thing. I didn't know what you'd want, so I got 2 different ones." She looked at the bag. She looked at him. "You keep buying things in 2s, she said. "It's a problem," he agreed. She reached in and took one without making it a bigger moment than it was, and he was grateful for that. He'd been around enough people who turned every gesture into a transaction, either an obligation incurred or a point scored, that Hannah's straightforward acceptance felt almost startling. She took the sandwich because she was hungry, and it was there. That was all. They ate without talking for a few minutes. Down the terminal, Mrs. Kowalski was still with the paramedic team, sitting up now, drinking something from a small cup, laughing at something one of them had said. Her color was good. She looked like herself. Hannah watched her for a moment. "She's okay," she said, mostly to herself. "Because of you." Hannah shook her head slightly, the gesture of someone deflecting a compliment they don't know how to hold. "Because she had her kit and her glucose tablets, and she wasn't alone." She paused. "That's the thing people don't understand about medical emergencies. Half the time it's not about expertise. It's just about someone being there and not panicking." "Most people panic," Damien said. "Most people haven't had enough practice." He looked at her. There was something in how she said it, flat and factual, no self-pity, that made him want to ask what had given her that kind of practice. He didn't ask. She'd tell him, or she wouldn't, and either was fine. They finished their food. Hannah crumpled the wrapper and tucked it neatly into the bag, then stood and stretched, one hand pressed briefly to the small of her back. "I'm going to find a bathroom," she said. "Change, freshen up." "Of course." She picked up her carry-on. Then she stopped and looked at him, and there was something different in her expression. Not soft exactly, but open in a way that it hadn't been at the beginning of the night. "Damien," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for the coffee and the food, and—" She made a small gesture that seemed to indicate the entire previous several hours. "For just sitting here." He looked at her steadily. "You would have been fine without me." "I know," she said. "That's not the point." She walked toward the restrooms. He watched her go. Then he pulled out his phone and opened his email and stared at it for approximately 45 seconds without reading any of it, then put it back in his pocket. Marcus called at 4:30. "You're still at the airport," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I am." A pause. "The London partners have confirmed Thursday. Dr. Reeves says Lily had a normal temperature and is asleep. Said it was probably nerves about the math test." "What math test?" "The one she didn't tell you about, apparently." Damien pressed his thumb against his eye socket. "Okay. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Marcus." "You're sitting in an airport at 4:30 in the morning when your car has been idling downstairs for 5 hours. Tell Terrence to go home. I'll get a car later." Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus had been with him for 9 years, which meant he had developed a precise map of every silence Damien produced and what each one meant. "Do you need anything?" Marcus asked carefully. "No," Damien said. "I'll check in at 7. He hung up. Hannah came back a few minutes later wearing a clean white blouse tucked into the same dark pants, her hair pulled back neatly. The navy coat folded over her arm. She looked, against all reasonable expectations for someone who had spent the night in an airport, like a person who was completely ready for whatever came next. "Better," she said, mostly to herself. "You look—" He stopped. She glanced at him. "Ready," he finished. "Good," she said. "That's the goal." She sat back down. He turned to her. "I have to tell you something," he said. She went still in that way she had, that watchful quiet. "Okay. Last night, when you were asleep, I purchased 2 seats on the 645. She looked at him for a long moment. "2. One for me, and one that I'd like to offer you. You already have a ticket." "I have a ticket on my company account. I bought a separate first-class seat for you." She was quiet for a moment that went on a beat too long. He could see the refusal forming, the way her jaw set slightly and her shoulders came back. "Before you say no," he said, "hear me out. You bought a plane ticket for a stranger in the middle of the night." "I did." That's a lot, Damien. I know it is. I know you don't need it," he said. "You've made that abundantly clear over the past 4 hours. You don't need the hotel room. You don't need the food. You don't need any of it." He paused. "I'm not offering because I think you need saving. I'm offering because you have an interview in 8 hours that matters to you, and you spent the night in an airport chair, and you still have a 6-hour flight to sit through, and first class has a seat that reclines fully flat, which is different from a seat in economy that reclines 3 inches into the person behind you." She looked at the floor, then back at him. "What do you want in return?" she asked. Not hostile, genuinely asking. "Nothing," he said. "People always want something." "I know," he said. "I usually do too. Last night was—" He stopped, searching for the word, and settled for the honest one. "Different." A long silence. The terminal was beginning to wake up around them. Other travelers appearing in 2s and 3s, gate agents arriving and switching on monitors, the overhead lights brightening slightly as the day shift systems came online. "I'll pay you back," she said finally. "You don't have to." "I will," she said. "Maybe not now, but I will." "Okay," he said, because arguing would have been wrong, and because he understood from the way she said it that this wasn't a social nicety. She meant it in the way she meant most things, completely. She picked up her bag. "All right," she said. "Let's go." The first-class cabin of the 645 was half empty, which was often the case on early morning cross-country flights, where the passengers who could afford first class frequently had their own options. Damien's seat was 2A. Hannah's was 2B, across the aisle. She settled in with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make themselves comfortable in uncertain spaces. Coat stowed, bag positioned, the small amenity kit examined briefly and then set aside. She did not appear impressed by the wider seat or the menu card or the small arrangement of toiletries. She appeared mildly relieved by the legroom, which struck him as the most honest possible response to first class. He ordered water. She ordered orange juice, drank half of it, then leaned her head back and closed her eyes, and he thought she'd fallen back asleep within minutes. He opened his laptop and looked at the London briefing documents for 45 seconds, then closed it again. Outside the window, the sun was coming up over the eastern end of the airport, orange and pale, and not particularly dramatic, just a regular sunrise doing its job. He thought about Lily. He thought about her math test, which she hadn't told him about, which was new. She usually told him things. He wondered if the stomachache had been about the test, or about something else, or about several things at once the way it usually was with kids her age. The feelings arriving in clusters too tangled to separate. He thought about calling her when they landed, before the time difference became an issue. He didn't know at what point he fell asleep, but he did. Leaning against the window in 2A, 30,000 feet over America, somewhere over the dark flatness of the Midwest that was beginning to lighten at the edges. He was woken up by a sound he couldn't immediately identify. Not loud, not sharp. More of a murmur, rising. He opened his eyes, and the cabin was darker than it should have been, and it took him a second to understand that they were flying through weather. The sky outside the window was a thick gray-white, the plane moving through it with occasional small bumps that rattled the overhead bins. The seatbelt sign was on. And 3 rows back, someone was in trouble. The murmur he'd heard was the flight attendant, a young woman named Petra, according to her name tag, who was crouched in the aisle next to a seat, speaking quietly and urgently into the intercom handset while keeping one hand on the arm of the passenger. The passenger was a woman, heavy-set, late 60s, gray hair cut short. She was leaning forward in her seat with her hands on her thighs, and Damien could see from 3 rows away that her breathing was wrong. Labored. Too deliberate, like someone manually operating a process that was supposed to be automatic. The first-class cabin had 4 other passengers. 1 was asleep with headphones on. 2 were watching the scene with the frozen non-intervention of people hoping someone else would handle it. 1 man in 1A had already gotten halfway out of his seat and then sat back down. Hannah was already moving. She had her seatbelt unclipped and was in the aisle before Damien had fully registered what was happening. She'd had her eyes closed 5 minutes ago. Now she was walking toward the back of the first-class section with the same deliberate, unhurried purpose he'd watched her use with Mrs. Kowalski, and he understood that this was simply how she moved toward trouble. Not running, because running creates panic, but not hesitating either. "I have medical experience," she said to Petra, pulling up short at the row and crouching immediately to eye level with the woman. "Can I help?" Petra, who had the look of someone extremely grateful to have a decision made for her, said, "Yes. Please, I've called for any medical personnel on board, and I have the kit." "Let me see her first." Hannah was already with the woman, 1 hand on her wrist, 1 eye on her face, the same quiet efficiency. "Ma'am, I'm Hannah. Can you hear me okay?" The woman looked at her. Her face was flushed and damp. "Yes," she said, the word coming out shorter than she intended, compressed by the effort of breathing. "Good. Can you describe what you're feeling? Take your time." "Chest," the woman said. "Tight, and my—" She pressed her left arm against her side. "My arm. The left." Hannah didn't visibly react. Her expression didn't change, didn't do the thing faces usually do when someone describes chest pain and left arm pain, which was sharpened into alarm. She just said, "Okay. How long?" "Maybe 20 minutes. I thought it was the turbulence." "Any history of heart problems? High blood pressure, cholesterol, anything like that?" "Blood pressure," the woman said. I take something for it. I can't remember." "That's okay." Hannah looked at Petra. "Get me the kit. I need an aspirin, if you have it, an oxygen mask, and blood pressure cuff, if there's one in there. And find out how far we are from any airport." Petra moved. Damien stood up and came down the aisle. Hannah glanced up at him briefly. 2 hours to LA? She asked. "Roughly," he said. "Maybe a little under." "Is there anyone closer?" "On your phone? Pull up a map." He already had it out. "Phoenix. Maybe 45 minutes with a direct course." "Talk to the flight crew," she said. "Not a suggestion. Tell them we need to divert to Phoenix." "Got it." He walked to the front of the cabin and knocked on the cockpit door, and had a conversation through it that lasted approximately 90 seconds, during which time he used the words "cardiac event," 45 minutes, and "please confirm Phoenix Sky Harbor," and at the end of which the first officer said they would contact their dispatch and begin the diversion protocol. When he came back, Hannah had the woman's left arm resting on the armrest, was monitoring her pulse with 2 fingers, and was talking to her so gently, continuously, the way you talk to someone who is frightened and needs to hear a human voice as much as anything else. "You're doing great," Hannah was saying. "The oxygen is helping. Just keep breathing like that, nice and slow. Don't try to talk unless you need to. I'm right here." The woman's eyes were fixed on Hannah's face with the complete trust of someone who has given themselves over to another person's care, and Damien watched Hannah accept that trust without flinching, without false cheer, without panic, without any performance at all. Just steady, present attention like she'd been doing it her whole life. Because she had been, he was beginning to understand. Not in hospitals, not with the credentialing and the protocol and the institutional structure. In kitchens and living rooms and clinic waiting rooms and airport terminals, doing it for years in the spaces between everything else she was trying to build for herself. "Phoenix is confirmed," Petra said, reappearing at Hannah's shoulder. 38 minutes. Hannah nodded. Good. Tell your pilot smooth as possible, please. We want to avoid anything jarring. She looked at the woman. Did you take the aspirin? Yes, the woman said. Her breathing was slightly better. Not good, but better. Okay, that's good. My name is Hannah. What's yours? Dorothy, the woman said. Dorothy, I'm going to stay right here with you until we land, okay? You're going to be fine. It was the second time in 12 hours Damien had heard her say those words to someone who was frightened, and both times she'd said them with the same quality, not reassurance as a comfort measure, but reassurance as a statement of determined intent. I'm going to make sure you are fine. The difference was significant. The plane landed in Phoenix 36 minutes later. Emergency crews were waiting on the tarmac. Hannah gave the paramedics a full rundown: vitals timeline, aspirin administered, oxygen duration, estimated onset of symptoms, with the precision of someone who'd done it before, and the paramedics received it with the focused attention you give information that matters. Dorothy was taken off the plane on a stretcher. At the door of the aircraft, she reached out and caught Hannah's hand. Thank you, she said. Hannah squeezed her hand once. Call your family when you land, she said. Don't get on another plane today. Dorothy made a sound that might have been a laugh. I'm a little ahead of you on that one. And then she was gone, down the jetway and into the waiting hands of people who would take it from there. And Hannah stood at the aircraft door for a moment, watching, and Damien stood behind her and did not say anything because there was nothing useful to say. The other passengers in the cabin, the ones who had watched the whole thing from their seats, were quiet. The man in 1A, who had half risen from his seat and then sat back down, was looking at his hands. The woman with the headphones had taken them off at some point during the diversion and was looking at Hannah with an expression that Damien recognized as recalibration, the specific adjustment people make when they realize they've been in the presence of something they underestimated. Petra put her hand on Hannah's arm. Can I get you anything? I'm okay, Hannah said. She turned and walked back to her seat, sat down, and looked out the window at the dry Phoenix morning, the flat brown geometry of the airport, the hard blue sky that had none of New York's gray ambiguity. Damien sat back down in 2A. The ground crew was working outside. They'd be back in the air in 40 minutes or so, the captain had said, pending paperwork and a brief mechanical check. He looked across the aisle at Hannah. She was leaning her elbow on the armrest, fingers pressed lightly against her mouth, looking at nothing in particular. You okay? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. I always get a little shaky after, she said. Not during, after. She looked at her hand, which was in fact slightly unsteady. It's stupid. It's adrenaline, he said. I know what it is. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh. I just don't love it. How many times have you done something like that? She considered the question. My mom, she said. 6 years of managing her condition, a lot of near misses. At the clinic, I've seen maybe... She shook her head. I don't keep count. Why not? Because it's not something I want to make a story of, she said simply. It's just what was needed. He looked at her. She was looking out the window still, the sun catching the left side of her face, turning the tiredness there into something else. Not beautiful in the posed sense, but real in a way that was harder to look away from. Hannah, he said. She turned. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you don't have to answer it. Okay? Why healthcare administration? He said. Not nursing, not medicine, administration. She looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not opening up exactly, but considering how much to give. Because I spent 6 years watching my mother get care that was technically adequate and systematically wrong, she said. The nurses were good. The doctors did what they could, but the system paused. Every appointment scheduled wrong, every referral lost in a fax somewhere, every form filled out 3 times because the systems didn't talk to each other. We spent half our energy just navigating the process instead of focusing on her actual health. She stopped. I know how to take care of people. I've been doing it my whole adult life, but I want to fix the part that breaks before the people get there." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very precise answer. I've had a long time to think about it. You wrote that in your Meridian application." She looked at him sharply. "You know my application?" "No," he said quickly. "I don't. I'm guessing you wrote that because it's the kind of thing that would make an application stand out. And from what I've seen of you tonight, you write the way you think, which is directly." She relaxed slightly. "Oh." "For the record," he said, "I don't know anyone at Meridian, and I haven't called anyone, and I won't." "I know," she said. "How do you know?" She looked at him with something that was almost amused. "Because if you were the kind of person who made calls, you would have done it already, and you wouldn't be telling me about it now." He said nothing. "And because," she continued, more quietly, "you said you wanted someone to help Lily if she needed it. People who want that for their kids don't undermine other people's kids." Something landed in his chest at that. It was unexpected, and he didn't have a name for it immediately. He sat with it for a moment. "She'd like you," he said. It came out before he decided to say it. Hannah looked at him, a long look. "Tell me about her," she said. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected deflection, or a polite non-engagement, or a subject change, all the things people did when a conversation got too specific. Instead, she was watching him with the same focused, unperforming attention she gave everything else, and he felt himself adjust, straighten slightly, like someone preparing to say a true thing. "She's 7, he said. She's—" He stopped, tried to find the words that weren't just the words a father uses about his daughter, the standard issue adjectives. "She's cautious," he said. "She thinks before she talks, which drives some of the kids at her school crazy because they're at that age where everything comes out before it's finished being thought. But Lily, she'll wait. She'll sit with something for a while, and then she'll say the most accurate thing you've ever heard a child say." Hannah smiled. That same small, crooked smile from earlier. "She sounds exhausting in the best possible way," she said. "That is exactly what she is," Damien said. "Does she know you got off the plane for her?" "No, I told her I missed the flight." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "She'd feel guilty," he said. "She'd spend a week apologizing. She takes responsibility for things that aren't her fault." "That's not a 7-year-old thing," Hannah said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." A quiet landed between them. Outside, the ground crew finished whatever they were doing and moved away from the plane. The engines were beginning their low pre-departure frequency. "My sister's the same way," Hannah said after a moment. "Renee, she's 34, and she still apologizes for things that happened in 2009. She shook her head. "I called her last night when I missed the connection. She offered to send me money. I said no. She apologized for offering." "What did you say?" "I told her to stop apologizing and go to sleep." She paused. "She didn't sleep. She texted me 4 times between midnight and 3 a.m. to make sure I was still alive." "You didn't text back?" "I was talking to you." He felt something he hadn't felt in a while, something uncomplicated. He didn't examine it too closely. "Does she know about the interview?" he asked. "She's the only one who does. My friends back home think I'm being—" She chose the word carefully. "Optimistic." "And your sister?" "She thinks I'm going to get it." Hannah said it without sentiment, just the plain fact of it. "She's been telling me that for 11 months. Every time I wanted to quit the night classes, every time I looked at the application requirements and thought I was wasting my time." She stopped. She just kept saying, "You're going to get it." "Are you?" She looked at him. Then she smiled, and this time it was different from the other smiles. Wider, real, slightly defiant. "Yeah," she said. "I am." The plane began to move. The runway at Phoenix gleamed in the early morning light, flat and infinite. Hannah turned and looked out the window, and Damien leaned his head back and looked at the ceiling of the cabin, and neither of them spoke again for a while. But the silence between them had changed completely over the course of one overnight flight, and they both knew it, though neither said so. It had started as the wary silence of 2 strangers sharing space in the dark. Now it was something closer to the silence of two people who have seen each other during something real and found that what they saw was worth sitting with. When the wheels left the ground and the plane angled up into the clean Arizona sky, Hannah reached across the aisle without looking at him and briefly touched his arm. Just her fingertips, just for a second, the way you touch something to confirm it's solid. Then she pulled her hand back and looked out the window and didn't say anything at all. Neither did he. But something had crossed the distance between them, and it wasn't going back. They landed in Los Angeles at 11:52 in the morning, which gave Hannah just over 3 hours. She knew the math before the wheels touched down. She'd been running it quietly in the back of her mind for the last hour of the flight, the way she ran most things. Not anxiously, but with the practical focus of someone who has learned that anxiety wastes time that planning could use. Rideshare from LAX to the Meridian Foundation offices in Westwood, 25 minutes in light traffic, 40 in heavy. It was Tuesday, nearly noon. Traffic would be somewhere in between. She needed to change her blouse. The white one she'd put on at JFK was fine, but she'd had it on since 4 in the morning, and it showed in small ways that she noticed even if no one else would. She had a backup in her carry-on, charcoal gray, which was better anyway. More serious. The blazer was clean. Her portfolio was in order. She had printed copies of everything she needed and one digital backup on a flash drive that lived in the inside pocket of her bag. She had thought of everything she could think of. That was all she could do. Damien's car was waiting at the curb when they came out of the terminal, a black SUV with a driver who stepped out when he saw Damien and opened the rear door without being asked. Damien had called ahead from the plane, which Hannah had overheard and not commented on because it wasn't her business. "Where are you staying?" Damien asked as they came through the automatic doors into the warm California air. It was November in LA, which meant it was 68 degrees and slightly overcast, the kind of weather that would have been considered a pleasant summer day in Ohio. "I have a reservation," she said. "A place near Westwood. Budget hotel. I'm at the Langham in Pasadena." He said it as information, not invitation. "My driver can take you wherever you need." She started to say no, which was her default, and then she stopped herself because the rideshare was going to take 15 minutes to arrive and another 40 to get there, and she had 3 hours and the math was already tight. "Westwood," she said to the driver. "Please." The driver, whose name was apparently Terrence and who had been with Damien long enough to show no reaction whatsoever to any arrangement, simply said, "Of course," and held the door. They rode in the back together with a 1.5 feet of seat between them, the LA sprawl opening up around them as they cleared the airport, the flat grids of Inglewood, the freeway interchange that looked from above like someone had dropped a plate of spaghetti, the palm trees that always seemed slightly unconvincing to people from the Midwest no matter how many times they saw them. Hannah was looking out the window. Damien was looking at his phone with the focused non-presence of someone who was technically handling business but only at partial capacity. "Thank you," she said. "For the car." "Of course." "I mean it. I know I keep saying that, but—" She stopped. "I'm not good at accepting help." "I noticed," he said without looking up from his phone. "Is that a criticism?" He looked up then. "No," he said. "I understand it." She looked at him. "I spent about 6 years after Lily's mother died not accepting anything from anyone," he said. "Not help, not grief counseling, not offers from people who genuinely wanted to be useful. I thought I was being strong." He paused. "I was being difficult." "What changed?" Lily turned 4 and started asking why Daddy never needed anything. He said it simply. "Kids are not subtle." Hannah turned back to the window. "My mother asked me the same thing, not in those words." She watched a gas station go by, a row of fast food places, a billboard advertising a law firm. She said, a week before she died, she said, "Hannah, I'm worried you're going to spend your whole life being so capable that nobody ever tries to take care of you." The car was quiet for a moment. Outside, the freeway moved around them in its indifferent way. "Smart woman," Damien said. She was. Hannah folded her hands in her lap. "I'm working on it." He nodded. He didn't push it, which was the right call. They reached the hotel, a clean, functional place on a side street in Westwood. the kind of establishment that priced itself for traveling academics and people visiting the university nearby. Not bad, not good, just adequate in the specific way that adequate things are. Terrence pulled up to the entrance. Hannah opened the door herself before he could come around. "Good luck today," Damien said. She paused with one foot on the pavement, looked back at him. "I have one ask," he said. "Not a favor. Just tell me how it goes." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Okay," and stepped out, and the door closed behind her. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the black SUV pull into traffic and disappear around the corner. Then she turned and walked into the hotel with her carry-on rolling behind her, her shoulders back, her mind already 3 hours ahead. The lobby of the Meridian Health Foundation occupied the first 2 floors of a glass building on Wilshire Boulevard, and from the outside it looked exactly the way it looked in the photographs Hannah had studied on her laptop in her apartment in Delwood. Purposeful, expensive, in an institutional rather than a flashy way. The kind of building that communicated very clearly that the people inside took themselves seriously. She arrived at 2:40, which was 20 minutes early, which was exactly right. The receptionist was a young man with rimless glasses who handed her a visitor badge and asked her to have a seat, and she sat in a chair in the waiting area and did not take out her phone and did not review her notes, because she had reviewed her notes on the plane and on the drive over, and reviewing them again now would not add anything except anxiety. Instead, she watched the building, the way people moved through the lobby, the way the staff interacted, quick and purposeful, nobody drifting, no excess motion. She watched a woman in a gray blazer walk through carrying a folder with the specific authority of someone who knew exactly where she was going, and Hannah thought, that is what this place produces. People who know where they're going. She wanted to be one of them, not for the blazer, not for the folder, for the thing underneath it. The ability to walk through a room like your presence there is not provisional. At 2:58, a woman came to collect her. Her name was Carol Huang, and she was the program coordinator for the fellowship, and she had the brisk warmth of someone who has conducted enough of these to know how to set people at ease without wasting their time. She shook Hannah's hand firmly and led her down a corridor and through a glass door and into a conference room where 3 people were seated around one end of an oval table. Hannah took them in quickly. The woman on the left had the look of an academic, sharp, slightly abstracted, pen already in hand. The man in the middle was older, silver-haired, the kind of physical stillness that comes from 30 years of being the most senior person in whatever room he was in. The woman on the right was younger, late 30s maybe, natural hair, a yellow blazer that was both a statement and a test of confidence, watching Hannah with frank assessment. "Ms. Pierce," said the man in the middle. "I'm Richard Okafor, Executive Director of the Foundation. This is Dr. Ellen Strauss, our Director of Program Development, and Janelle Morris, our current Senior Fellow." He gestured to the seat across from them. "Please sit down." She sat. "We appreciate you making the trip," Carol said from the doorway, and then closed the door and left them. "We understand you had some travel difficulties getting here," Okafor said. Not unkindly, but not softened either. Just a fact being named. "I did," Hannah said. "I'm here." Janelle Morris, the one in the yellow blazer, made a small sound that might have been approval. "We have your application materials," Dr. Strauss said, looking at her folder. "Your essay was strong. Your references are solid. Your clinical background is unusual for this program. Most of our candidates come from hospital administration or health policy tracks." She looked up. "Tell us why that's an asset rather than a gap." Hannah had prepared for this question. She had prepared for every question she could anticipate, which was most of them. But she had also decided on the plane, somewhere over Arizona, watching Dorothy breathe carefully into an oxygen mask, that she was going to answer every question in this room as directly as she possibly could, without performance and without hedge. Because the gap between what administrators plan and what patients actually experience is built by people who have never stood on the patient's side of it, she said. "I have, for 6 years as a caregiver, and for the last 4 years inside a clinical setting at the ground level. I know where the systems fail because I've watched them fail in real time, on real people." She paused. "I don't have a master's degree in health policy. I have something harder to teach. I know what it costs when the system gets it wrong." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's an answer," Janelle said. Okafor folded his hands. "Ms. Pierce, your application was competitive, but not the highest scoring in this cohort. We have candidates with graduate degrees from Hopkins and Columbia. Why should we choose you over them?" It was the bluntest version of the question, and she respected him for it. "You shouldn't," she said, "if what you're looking for is someone who's already been given access to the rooms where these decisions get made." She held his gaze. "But if you're looking for someone who has had to solve healthcare problems with the resources that most patients actually have, not the resources that look good in a policy paper, then my background is not a gap. It's the point." Dr. Strauss was writing something. "Let's talk about your clinic work," she said. "Riverside Urgent Care. You worked there for 4 years as a patient care coordinator." "Yes." "You were also doing double shifts at another facility during this time?" "Yes, Delwood Community Health Center, part-time administrative support. I left that position 8 months ago when the night classes became too much to manage on top of both jobs." "You were supporting yourself, caring for your mother, working 2 jobs, and taking night classes simultaneously." Dr. Strauss said it without inflection, as if reading a list of specifications. "Yes." "For how long?" "About 4 years, fully. The last 2 years of my mother's illness and the 2 years after." Janelle was looking at her, not with pity, with the specific attention of someone recognizing something familiar. "And you're telling us," Okafor said slowly, "that this experience qualifies you to manage systems that serve thousands of patients across multiple facilities." "I'm telling you," Hannah said, "that it's the reason I understand what those patients need before they walk through the door." She paused. "The candidates from Hopkins can learn the policy. I can learn the policy too. I've been learning it in night classes for 3 years. But nobody can teach someone what it feels like to sit on hold for 40 minutes trying to reschedule a specialist appointment for a person who is in pain in the next room." She paused again. "I know what that feels like, and I will never design a system that makes it that hard." The room was quiet. Outside the glass wall, the city moved around them in its indifferent rhythm. "That's a strong statement," Dr. Strauss said. "It's a true one," Hannah said. Richard Okafor looked at her for a moment that went on long enough to register. Then he uncapped his pen and wrote something on the pad in front of him. The interview continued for another 40 minutes. They went through her night class curriculum, her understanding of Meridian's current program structure, her thoughts on population health management, her ability to handle conflict between clinical staff and administrative priorities. She answered everything directly. There were 2 questions she didn't have a perfect answer to. She said so, and then gave the best answer she had and named specifically what she would need to learn to do better. When it was over, Okafor shook her hand across the table and told her she'd hear from them within the week. Janelle Morris caught up with her in the corridor outside. "Hey," she said, falling into step. "Janelle, I know we just met in there, but off the record, that answer about the system's failure, the on-hold thing." She paused. "I've been in this program for 18 months, and I've heard 100 candidates talk about healthcare reform. You're the first one who made it sound like something that happened to a real person." Hannah looked at her. "It did." "I know." Janelle stopped at the elevator. "Good luck." Hannah rode the elevator down alone. She stood in the lobby for a moment, visitor badge still clipped to her blazer, the afternoon light coming through the glass front of the building at a long angle. She pulled out her phone and texted Renee. "Done. Went well, I think. We'll call tonight." Renee replied in 11 seconds. "I knew it. Call me the second you're free." Hannah almost smiled. She took off the visitor badge, tucked it into her bag, old clinic habit, never leave your ID just floating around, and walked out into the afternoon. She was standing on the sidewalk, trying to decide whether to call the rideshare back or find somewhere to sit down for a few minutes when her phone rang. Unknown number, Los Angeles area code. She answered, "Ms. Pierce, this is Richard Okafor." She went very still. "Mr. Okafor." "I don't normally do this," he said. "We have a process and we follow it, and I'll still follow it formally. But I wanted to call you personally because in 22 years running fellowship programs, I don't think I've had a candidate answer the question about the competitor candidates the way you did this afternoon. A pause. I wanted you to know that you should expect to hear from us very early next week, and that the conversation you should prepare for is not a rejection conversation. Hannah stood on the sidewalk in Los Angeles and breathed very carefully. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out steady, which was an achievement. Enjoy the rest of your day, Okafor said. And Ms. Pierce, safe travels. He hung up. She stood there for another moment. A bus went by. A couple walked past, arguing about something. A pigeon landed on the sidewalk 3 feet away and looked at her with the blank evaluative stare of pigeons everywhere. She called Renee. I think I got it, she said. Renee's response was not a sound that could be reproduced in any responsible way. It lasted approximately 8 seconds and involved her name being said at a volume suggesting the news had been received in a football stadium rather than a kitchen in Delwood, Ohio. Tell me everything, Renee said. Start at the beginning. No. Start from when you landed. No. Start from last night. I'll tell you tonight, Hannah said. I promise. Are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine, Hannah said. I'm just standing on a sidewalk in Los Angeles feeling a little bit like the ground isn't fully solid. That's allowed, Renee said. That is absolutely allowed. They hung up. Hannah put her phone in her pocket and looked up at the building behind her. The Meridian Foundation, glass and concrete and purpose. And then she looked out at Wilshire Boulevard, the palm trees and the buses, and the late afternoon light that was doing something gold and specific to everything it touched. She thought about texting Damien. She'd said she would tell him how it went, but she stood there for a moment and couldn't quite find the right version of the words, so she put her phone back in her pocket and decided she'd figure that out later. She pulled out her phone to order a rideshare back to the hotel. She had a red-eye to catch. She had to pack. She had to eat something real, because the last real food she'd had was that sandwich in the airport before dawn, and she could feel the deficit of it in a low, persistent way. The rideshare would be 11 minutes. She sat down on a low concrete wall outside the building and looked at the street. The sky above was beginning to shift toward evening, the overcast thinning at the edges, the sun finding gaps to come through. She thought about Renee. She thought about her mother, which she did several times a day, which had become a kind of habit she no longer questioned, the small reflex of turning toward someone who wasn't there, saying the things you'd say if you could. She thought about Dorothy on the plane. She thought about Mrs. Kowalski in the terminal. She thought about the paramedic at Phoenix who had looked at her and asked, and the way she'd said, "No, I was just nearby." She'd been just nearby a lot of times. That was the thing she hadn't said in the interview room, not because she was holding back, but because it wasn't the right language for that room. But it was the true thing. She had never been in a crisis because she was trained for it or because she was looking for it. She'd been in them because she happened to be there, and because looking away was never something she'd been able to make herself do. She didn't know if that was strength. She didn't know if it was something she'd cultivated or something she'd just never managed to lose. Either way, it was hers, and it had taken her to this sidewalk on this afternoon in Los Angeles, and that was worth something. The rideshare arrived in 9 minutes, not 11. She was back at the hotel by 5:15. She showered, packed her bag, sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, eating a turkey sandwich from a place down the street that the front desk recommended, and which was better than expected. She watched the news for a while without really watching it. She called Renee back and told her everything she could tell her in 30 minutes, which was most of it, and Renee listened and cried twice and said, "I knew it, I always knew it," with the frequency of a person who has earned the right to those words through years of actually believing them. At 7:30, she picked up her phone and texted Damien. It was a short text. She thought about making it shorter and then thought about making it longer and then sent what she had. Interview went well, better than expected. Thank you for the coffee and the seat and the company. She put the phone down and went to do the final check of her bag. When she came back, there was a reply. It read, "Glad to hear it. You were always going to be fine." She looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote back, "You sound like my sister." His reply came quickly. "Is that a compliment?" She smiled. She wrote, "Yes," and put her phone in her pocket. She was on her way downstairs, carry-on rolling behind her, when the notification came through. She almost missed it. It was a Google alert, set up months ago on Damien Ashcroft's name as part of the general professional research she did on anyone she was going to encounter in the healthcare sector, because knowing the landscape was part of the job she was training herself to do. The alert was a photograph, taken at JFK, timestamp from the previous night. The two of them, her and Damien, sitting in the terminal, the coffee cups visible on the seat between them, the overhead lights harsh and institutional. The angle was from a distance, someone with a long lens or a phone zoom, the image slightly grainy but entirely legible. The headline on the gossip site that had published it read, "Damien Ashcroft's Mystery Companion, Billionaire's Late-Night Airport Rendezvous Raises Questions." She stopped walking. She read the article, which took approximately 90 seconds because it was not long and not particularly sophisticated. A speculative piece, notable mostly for what it didn't know. The writer didn't have her name. They didn't know where she was going or why. They'd contacted a rep for Ashcroft Medical Group for comment and received no response. The speculation was exactly what you'd expect. Mystery woman, private flight, timing. None of it was accurate. All of it was visible. She stood in the hotel lobby with her carry-on beside her and thought about it with a specific focus that had nothing to do with embarrassment or panic. She thought about what it meant for her interview. She thought about what it meant for Meridian. She thought about what it looked like from the outside, for someone who didn't know what had actually happened. And she thought about what it would look like if someone connected the dots and called Meridian and suggested that the woman they just interviewed had traveled to Los Angeles courtesy of a billionaire with interests in the healthcare sector. She texted Damien, "Have you seen the photo?" He responded in under 2 minutes. "Yes. Marcus flagged it an hour ago. I'm sorry, Hannah. I should have anticipated this." She wrote back, "Did you know someone was taking it?" His reply, "No. These things happen near airports. I should have been more careful about where we sat." She looked at the text for a moment. Then she wrote, "It's not your fault, but I need to make sure it doesn't affect my interview." He wrote, "What do you need?" She thought about that. She thought about what Richard Okafor's voice had sounded like on the phone this afternoon. Measured, direct, careful. She thought about what it would look like if Meridian saw this photo before they made their decision and had questions and nobody addressed it. She wrote, "Nothing yet. Let me think." She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the lobby for another moment, thinking. The thing about spending years learning to solve problems with limited resources is that you develop a specific instinct for what needs to be addressed directly and what can be left alone. The photo could be left alone, and it would probably blow over because she was nobody, and Damien's actual life was considerably more interesting to gossip publications than one grainy airport picture. Or it could attach itself to her name at the exact moment her name was being considered for something that could change her life. And then it would not blow over. It would calcify. She had spent the entire interview telling 3 people that she was exactly who her application said she was. That her background was real, her work was real, her goals were her own, and all of it was true. Every word. She was not going to let a photograph undermine the truest performance she had ever given in a professional setting. She sat down on one of the lobby chairs, opened her laptop, and started writing. It took her 45 minutes. She wrote it twice. The first version was too defensive, too much explaining, too many words working too hard to justify what needed no justification. She deleted it and started again. The second version was 12 sentences. It stated what had happened, when and why. It stated the nature of her connection to Damien Ashcroft, strangers who shared a terminal, nothing more. It stated plainly that no business relationship or professional influence had been offered or accepted, and it included a screenshot of the text exchange in which Damien had said, "I have one ask, not a favor. Tell me how it goes," which was the clearest available evidence of what neither of them had asked of the other. She attached the email to Richard Okafor's address, which was on the business card he'd left on the conference table. She almost hit send. Then she stopped. She called Damien instead. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm writing a statement to Meridian," she said, explaining what happened and what didn't happen. "I want you to know I'm going to send it." A brief pause. "Okay," he said. I'm going to include our text exchange from tonight, just the part where you didn't ask me for anything. That's fine. I'm also going to say that you offered me a seat on the flight out of professional courtesy after I missed my connection, and that no conditions were attached. She paused. Is that accurate? Yes, he said. That is completely accurate. Is there anything about your relationship with Meridian that I should know about? Anything that would look like a conflict of interest that I'm not aware of? A pause. Longer this time. 2 of our hospital networks have referral relationships with Meridian-affiliated clinics, he said. It's a standard partnership arrangement. It has nothing to do with their fellowship program. Would you call it a conflict of interest? No, he said. Would a reasonable person looking at it from the outside potentially ask the question? She appreciated that he answered that honestly. Yes. Then include it, he said. Be the one who names it first. She hadn't been sure he would say that. She'd thought he might say it was irrelevant, or that she was overthinking it. Instead, he'd said the thing she already knew but wanted to hear from him directly, because she needed to know he was the kind of person who would say it. Okay, she said. She revised the statement, added 2 sentences about the hospital referral relationship, noting that she had not been aware of it until this conversation and that it had no bearing on her application or her interactions with Damien Ashcroft. She sent it at 8:47 p.m. Okafor's response came the following morning when she was already at LAX for her 7 a.m. red-eye and running on 3 hours of sleep. Ms. Pierce, thank you for your transparency. This is exactly the kind of communication we value in our fellows. We look forward to speaking with you early next week. She read it standing in line for security, her carry-on between her feet, strangers flowing around her in both directions, the vast and indifferent machinery of departure operating at full morning speed. She read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket, picked up her bag, and moved forward. The red-eye landed at Columbus at 6:18 in the morning, 40 minutes late because of headwinds over Nevada that nobody had bothered to explain over the intercom. Hannah had slept in the middle seat between a college student who smelled like energy drinks and a man who snored in a specific rhythmic pattern that her exhausted brain had eventually decided to treat as white noise. She woke up with a stiff neck, a crease on her left cheek from the seat headrest, and the particular clarity that comes from sleeping just enough to be functional, but not enough to feel rested. She was back in Delwood by 8:30. Mrs. Kwan's cat was sitting in the upstairs window when she came up the front walk, watching her return with the impassive judgment of a creature who had opinions about irregular schedules. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, the ironing board still out in the corner of the bedroom, the extra copies of her portfolio still on the kitchen table, her mother's photograph still on the shelf above the radiator, slightly crooked in its frame, the way it always was no matter how many times she straightened it. She put her bag down, straightened the photograph, and stood in the middle of her kitchen for a moment just breathing. Then she made coffee, called Renee, and told her everything she hadn't told her the night before. Renee listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to be notable, and when Hannah finished, Renee said, "So let me get this straight. You missed your flight, spent the night in an airport, saved 2 people's lives, sent a preemptive statement to the interview panel, and got a call from the director telling you that you basically have the fellowship." "He didn't say I have it. He called you personally from his cell phone." "I don't know if it was his cell." "Hannah, he called you personally." A pause. "Yes." "Then you have it." Renee's voice had something in it that wasn't quite tears but was adjacent to them. Mom would be losing her mind right now. Hannah looked at the photograph on the shelf. Her mother in a yellow sundress, laughing at something off camera, the kind of photograph that catches a person at their most themselves. "Yeah," she said. She would. They talked for another 20 minutes. When she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and opened her laptop and did something she hadn't let herself do until now. She looked up the Meridian Health Foundation Fellowship Program in detail. The salary, the housing stipend, the network of facilities where fellows rotated, the alumni list, which read like a directory of people who had spent the last decade reshaping healthcare access in the country in ways both visible and invisible. She closed the laptop after 20 minutes because looking at it too long felt like tempting something. She went to work. The Riverside Urgent Care Clinic opened at 9, and Hannah was scheduled through Thursday. She'd arranged her leave carefully. 2 days for the travel, 1 buffer day, back by Wednesday. Dr. Osai, the clinic director, had approved it without asking too many questions, which she appreciated. She hadn't told him what the trip was for because she hadn't wanted to explain it if it didn't work out. The clinic was a low brick building on the east side of Delwood, wedged between a pharmacy and a laundromat, and it served roughly 300 patients a week, most of them uninsured or underinsured, most of them coming in for things that should have been caught earlier by a primary care physician they couldn't afford to see. Hannah had been coordinating patient care here for 4 years. She knew the waiting room chairs by their specific squeaks. She knew which exam room light flickered when the weather changed. She knew the names of most of the regulars and the particular ways each of them needed to be talked to. Mr. Okonkwo, who needed everything explained twice, not because he didn't understand, but because the second explanation made him feel like you weren't in a hurry, and Mrs. Delgado, who needed you to write things down because her anxiety made verbal instructions disappear the moment she left the building. She walked in on Wednesday morning, and the front desk coordinator, a woman named Pam, who had been here longer than anyone, looked up and said, "How'd it go?" "Good," Hannah said. "Good like politely good or good like actually good?" "Actually good, I think." Pam looked at her for a moment, reading whatever was in her face, and then she said, "About time," and handed her the morning's intake stack. The week passed the way weeks at the clinic always passed. Too fast and too slow simultaneously, the hours inside the building collapsing into each other, and then suddenly it was 5 o'clock and she'd forgotten to eat lunch again. She caught up on paperwork. She helped a 19-year-old navigate an insurance appeal that had been wrongly denied for the 3rd time, which took most of Thursday afternoon and required her to stay on hold for 43 minutes, and then explain the same information to 4 different people before the 5th one had both the authority and the willingness to fix it. She thought about what she'd said in the interview room. She thought about it every time she sat on hold. Damien texted twice during the week, once on Wednesday. "Hope you got home okay." Once on Friday. The London meeting went well, for what it's worth. She replied to both with short, real answers. It wasn't a correspondence exactly. There was no rhythm to it yet, no established pattern. It was more like 2 people leaving lights on in their windows without quite acknowledging they were doing it for each other. On Monday morning at 9:14, her phone rang. Los Angeles area code. She was standing at the printer when it rang, waiting for a patient summary to print, and she walked to the break room in the back before she answered because she didn't want to have this conversation in the middle of the clinic floor. "Ms. Pierce," said Richard Okafor. "Good morning." "Good morning," she said. "I'll be direct," he said. "The committee completed its review this morning. We'd like to offer you a position in this year's cohort." She put her hand flat on the break room counter. "Yes," she said. A pause. "I haven't given you the terms yet." "I know," she said. "Yes." She heard something in his voice that might have been a smile. "The formal offer letter goes out this afternoon. You'll have 2 weeks to review and respond. I want to flag that we'd like you to start January 15th, which is earlier than our usual February start. We have a gap in one of our facility rotations, and your clinical background makes you the right fit to fill it." "January 15th works," she said. "Ms. Pierce, you might want to actually look at the letter first." "I will," she said. "But, yes." After she hung up, she stood in the break room for a moment. The printer in the other room had finished and was beeping at her. Somewhere in the clinic, a child was crying. The specific cry of a kid getting a shot, indignant rather than hurt. The refrigerator hummed. The fluorescent light above her buzzed at a frequency she'd never quite stopped noticing. She called Renee. Renee answered on the first ring. "I got it," Hannah said. What followed was not a conversation so much as an extended emotional event. When it subsided enough for words, Renee said, "You have to tell Damien." Hannah had been sitting with that thought all morning, circling it from different angles. We're not, Hannah. I know. You told him you would. I know. She texted him that afternoon. It took her 3 drafts, which was embarrassing for someone who prided herself on saying things directly. "Got the call this morning. I'm in." Start date January 15th. His reply came in 4 minutes. "I knew you would. Congratulations, Hannah. This is exactly where you're supposed to be." She read it twice. Then she wrote back, "Thank you for everything that night and for staying out of it when it mattered." He replied, "That part was easy." She put her phone down and went back to work. What happened in the following 3 days was not something she anticipated, and the fact that she didn't anticipate it was itself something she would think about later. The gap between the story you are living and the story the world decides to tell about you. The photo from JFK had circulated quietly during the week she was home. Gossip sites mostly, the kind that traffic in speculation about wealthy men and unnamed women, the kind she normally had no occasion to read. But on Thursday evening, a financial news outlet published something with more teeth, a piece questioning whether Damien Ashcroft's presence on a flight diverted to Phoenix for a medical emergency involving a passenger had any connection to Ashcroft Medical Group's ongoing negotiations with a Western Regional Hospital consortium that had facilities in Arizona. The piece was speculative and poorly sourced, but it attached his name to the word controversy in a way that the other board members of Ashcroft Medical Group would notice, and that the hospital trustees currently in merger discussions with his company would absolutely notice. It also, in its final paragraph, mentioned that Ashcroft had been accompanied on the flight by an unidentified woman who was connected to a healthcare foundation in Los Angeles. Hannah saw it Thursday night. She sat with it for 2 hours. She read the piece 3 times. She looked up the byline. A business journalist named Colton Webb, who had a history of writing adversarial pieces about healthcare consolidation, which gave the article a specific political weight beyond the gossip. She looked up the hospital consortium mentioned in the piece, Western Regional Integrated Health, a 7-hospital network she'd never heard of, but which, once she found their public filings, was clearly significant to Ashcroft Medical Group's Western expansion. She understood what this article was doing. It was using the photo, the flight diversion, and the unidentified woman, her, to construct a narrative about conflicts of interest and improper influence in a major healthcare merger. None of that narrative was accurate, but accuracy was not the point of the piece. Implication was the point. An implication, in the business world Damien operated in, could do real damage. She called him at 10 p.m. She didn't text first. She just called. He answered. "You've seen the web piece," she said. "Yes." His voice was even, which she recognized by now as the sound of him managing something. "My legal team has seen it. Marcus has seen it. I've had 4 calls tonight from board members." "What are you telling them?" "The truth," he said. "That the flight diversion was a medical emergency handled by a fellow passenger, that I had no prior relationship with that passenger, and that my presence on the flight had no connection to any business interest." "Are they believing you?" A pause. "Most of them. There are 2 trustees from the Western Regional side of the merger who are asking more questions than the situation warrants." She understood what that meant. "They're using it." "Possibly." "The merger's been in negotiation for how long?" 14 months. "And someone in that negotiation would benefit from a conflict of interest allegation." He was quiet for a moment. "You're good at this." "I've been in healthcare administration for 4 years," she said. "Resource fights and political maneuvering look the same at every level. The stakes are just different." A pause. Then, "Hannah, I don't want you involved in this." "I'm already involved in it," she said. "My name is going to come out. It might already be out and I just haven't seen it yet. When it does, whoever is driving this narrative is going to connect me to Meridian, and they are going to suggest that you influenced my fellowship. Which I didn't. Which you didn't, but that's not how it's going to read in a follow-up piece unless someone addresses it. My PR team is handling it. Damien." She said his name the way she said most things, quietly and with enough weight to stop traffic. "Your PR team can explain what you didn't do. They can't explain what I actually did. That's my story, and I need to be the one who tells it." The line was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "You have a meeting with the Western Regional Trustees. When?" "Monday. It was already scheduled. It's now going to be a considerably more complicated meeting than originally planned." "I want to come." A longer pause. "Hannah, I know what that sounds like," she said. "I know it sounds like I'm inserting myself into your business. But think about what happens if you walk into that room on Monday and try to explain me without me there. Everything you say about me is hearsay. Every explanation you give is something a lawyer can later characterize as a managed narrative. And if you're there, then they have to look at me directly, she said, and decide for themselves. She could hear him thinking, not hesitating, actually thinking, the way he did when he was turning something over to find its correct angle. You just got a fellowship offer, he said. You start in January. You have a career to protect. Yes, she said, which is exactly why I need to be in that room, because my name is going to be in a follow-up piece, and when it is, I want Richard Okafor to read that I walked into a boardroom and told the truth, not that I sat in Ohio while someone else managed the story. Another silence. Then, the meeting is at 2 p.m. Monday, Midtown Manhattan, Ashcroft Medical Group's offices. I can be there, she said. Hannah, you don't have to do this. I know I don't have to, she said. That's the point. She booked a train to New York on Sunday evening. It was cheaper than flying and she had time, and she was still at a point in her life where that math mattered. 7 hours on Amtrak with a seat that was comfortable enough and a coffee from the cafe car and her laptop open on her tray table, reading everything she could find about the Western Regional merger. The public filings, the press releases, the industry analysis pieces, the background on the trustees. She arrived in New York at 6:20 Monday morning and took the subway to a coffee shop in Midtown, where she ordered breakfast and kept reading until 9. She texted Damien when she was in the city. He replied, "My office is in the building. Come up at 1. I'll brief you before the meeting." The Ashcroft Medical Group offices occupied the 31st through 34th floors of a glass tower on Park Avenue, and the lobby was the kind of lobby that communicated very efficiently that the company could afford this lobby and many other lobbies besides. Hannah rode the elevator to 32 and gave her name to the receptionist and was brought to a conference room where Damien was already sitting with 2 other people, a man she didn't know and Marcus, whom she recognized from the descriptions Damien had given. Marcus was younger than she'd imagined, late 30s, compact, with the look of someone who had absorbed enormous quantities of information over many years and organized it into a system that worked. He looked at her when she came in with an expression she couldn't quite read. Assessment, yes, but something behind it. "Hannah Pierce," Damien said, standing. He said it the way you say something you've been thinking about. "Marcus Teal, and this is Paul Devers, our general counsel." Paul Devers was 50-something, silver at the temples, and had the specific watchfulness of a lawyer who has spent decades in rooms where things go wrong. He shook her hand and said, "I've read your statement to Meridian." She looked at Damien. "I shared it," he said, "with his permission to share it with me." She'd given him permission to share it. She nodded. "It was well constructed," Devers said. "Direct. No excess. You didn't over-explain." He paused. "Today is going to require the same quality." "Tell me what you need from me," she said. Devers walked her through it for the next 50 minutes. The merger structure. The specific trustees who were applying pressures. 2 men named Garrison and Whitfield, both from the Western Regional Board, both with financial positions that would be affected differently depending on the merger terms, and both of whom had been using the photo and the web article to introduce doubt into the broader trustee group about Damien's judgment. The goal was not to blow up the merger. Garrison and Whitfield presumably understood that a collapsed merger served nobody, but to extract better terms by making Damien negotiate from a defensive position. "They're not after you," Devers said to Hannah. "You're a tool. What they're after is a version of Damien who walks into that room rattled and accommodating." "And what they're going to get instead," Hannah said, "is a version of him who had nothing to hide and therefore invited the person they're using as a weapon to come and speak for herself." Devers looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Damien. "Where did you find her?" he said. "Gate 14, Damien said. JEFK. At 1:55, they walked into the large conference room on the 34th floor. The Western Regional trustees were already there, 6 people total, Garrison and Whitfield among them, both of whom looked up when Hannah walked in with a reaction she'd anticipated but which still took a specific form of nerve to absorb. Garrison, who was heavy-set with the ruddy complexion of a man who spent a lot of time being confident in rooms, let his eyes move over her once with a dismissiveness that was almost professional in its precision. Damien sat at the head of the table, his legal team on one side, his CFO and two board members on the other. Hannah sat at the corner, not at the table exactly, not pushed to the wall, but at the edge, visible without being positioned as a principal. The meeting opened with the usual framing: agenda items, merger timeline update, quarterly projections. Hannah watched the room. She watched Garrison. He was patient, which told her he was waiting for his moment rather than planning to create it. He found it 20 minutes in during a pause in the financial discussion. "Before we proceed," Garrison said, with the particular tone of someone who has practiced sounding reluctant, "I think the group deserves some clarity on a matter that's created some concern among our trustees." Damien looked at him calmly. "Go ahead." "There's been some coverage this week." Garrison made a gesture that suggested the coverage was an unfortunate external thing rather than something he'd been actively monitoring. "Suggesting a possible relationship between yourself and a person connected to a foundation that has overlapping interests with our merger partner networks." He paused. "We're not suggesting impropriety. We're simply noting that transparency is important at this stage." The room was quiet. Several trustees were looking at Damien. Two were looking at Hannah. Hannah stood up. It wasn't dramatic. She just stood, the way you stand when you have something to say, and sitting down while saying it would underserve it. "My name is Hannah Pierce," she said. "I'm the person in the photograph." Garrison blinked. He hadn't expected this. She had known he wouldn't. "I'm a healthcare administration fellow at the Meridian Health Foundation, starting in January. Before that, I was a patient care coordinator at Riverside Urgent Care in Delwood, Ohio, for 4 years. I have no business relationship with Damien Ashcroft or Ashcroft Medical Group, and I had never met him before the night of November 19th, when we both happened to be in Terminal 4 at JFK Airport." She spoke without notes. She'd decided not to use notes because notes suggested preparation for a story, and what she was telling was not a story. It was a sequence of events that had actually occurred. "I missed a connecting flight." He had gotten off a flight to be available for his daughter. We sat in the same part of the terminal for several hours because there was nowhere else to be. He offered me a seat on the morning flight to Los Angeles because I had an interview and he had an available ticket. I accepted because the interview mattered to me, and I'm not in a position to be proud about transportation. She paused. "He has never contacted anyone on my behalf. He has never offered to. He asked for nothing in return. I have written documentation of all of this, including a preemptive disclosure I sent to the Meridian Foundation before their decision was made." She looked at Garrison directly. He was a man who was used to making people uncomfortable and not accustomed to being on the receiving end of it. "I understand that my existence in that photograph is inconvenient for whatever argument you were planning to make today," she said. "But I am not a conflict of interest. I am a person who was in an airport and accepted a cup of coffee from a stranger. And I'm telling you this directly because Damien Ashcroft deserves to have the truth told by the person who knows it, not managed by a legal team on his behalf." The room was quiet. Whitfield, who had said nothing so far, looked at the table in front of him with the expression of someone recalculating. Garrison recovered quickly. She gave him credit for that. He said, "We appreciate your transparency, Miss Pierce. I think I speak for everyone when I say, 'Mr. Garrison,'" she said. Not rudely, but not letting him finish the pivot either. "I didn't come here for appreciation. I came here because what was being implied about this man is not true, and it's not fair. And I was in a position to say so clearly." She paused. "I hope the rest of your conversation today is about the merger. That seems like a better use of everyone's time." She sat down. The room was quiet for another 2 seconds. Then Damien's CFO cleared his throat, opened his folder, and said, "If we can return to the Q4 projections." And the meeting moved forward. Garrison did not raise the issue again. Whitfield asked 2 more questions about the merger terms later in the meeting, both of them substantive, which told Hannah that whatever leverage they'd planned to extract from the personal angle had been effectively neutralized. The meeting ended at 4:15. Handshakes, agendas collected. The specific post-meeting energy of people recalibrating their positions without admitting they're doing so. In the elevator going down, Marcus stood beside Hannah and said nothing for 3 floors. Then he said, "You know, you just made my job significantly more complicated." She looked at him. How? Because now I have to figure out how to keep you out of every future piece of coverage that mentions his name. And after what you just did in there, that is going to be considerably harder. He paused. I'm not complaining. I'm just noting it. She almost smiled. I'm not planning to make a habit of walking into his board meetings. No, Marcus said. But you're going to be hard to explain. Damien was waiting in the lobby when she came out. His jacket was off, his tie loosened in the specific way that suggested the meeting had been an effort, even if he hadn't shown it. He looked at her. You didn't have to do that, he said. You keep saying that, she said. It keeps being true. It keeps being beside the point, she said. They stood in the lobby of the building, the afternoon foot traffic moving around them. Outside, through the glass, Park Avenue was doing what Park Avenue did, indifferent to everything happening inside the buildings that lined it. Did it work? She asked. The merger. We'll know in a few days. But Whitfield pulled me aside at the end and told me the Q4 numbers were satisfactory. He paused. Which means yes. She nodded. Good. Hannah. He said her name and then stopped. She looked at him. He had the look of someone who has reached the edge of what he'd prepared to say and is now working with whatever is actually there. I owe you something, and I don't know what it is yet. You don't owe me anything, she said. I did it because it was the true thing to do. I know, he said. That's actually the problem. She looked at him. I've been in business for 15 years, he said. I know a lot of people. I have employees and partners and board members and people who owe me things and people I owe things to, and the list is long and complicated and mostly transactional. He paused. I cannot remember the last time someone did something for me that was just true, with no architecture around it. She looked at him for a moment, at the tiredness in his face and the something underneath the tiredness that was less guarded than she'd seen it. I know something about that, she said. I know you do. They stood there for another second. Then she said, I need to get to Penn Station. I have a 7 o'clock train. I know where the subway is, she said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He nodded. He understood by now what that meant and what it didn't mean. She turned to go. Then she stopped. Damien, she said. He looked at her. When I start at Meridian, she said. In January. I'm going to be in Los Angeles for 2 years. She paused. That's not very close to New York. He held her gaze. No, he said. It's not. But it's not impossible, she said. She said it the way she said most things, quietly and with complete precision and without any decoration around it. Then she walked out through the glass doors and into the cold Monday afternoon, and Damien stood in the lobby of his building and watched her go, and did not look away until she was out of sight. Marcus appeared beside him. She's something, Marcus said. Yes, Damien said. You know she's going to make your life very complicated. Damien picked up his jacket from where he'd folded it over his arm. Probably, he said. You don't seem bothered. I'm not, he said, and meant it. He walked toward the elevator. Get me the Whitfield numbers by end of day. Already in your inbox, Marcus said. Damien pressed the button for 34. The doors closed. He stood alone in the elevator going up, and the expression on his face was the one he almost never let happen in professional spaces. Unguarded, uncertain in the specific way that means something has shifted and you're still figuring out where everything is going to land. He thought about what she'd said. Not impossible. He thought about Lily, who had called him that morning before the meeting with a stomachache that he now strongly suspected was nerves about a different math test she hadn't told him about yet. He thought about what it would be like to tell Lily about Hannah Pierce. Not yet, but sometime. He thought about Gate 14 at JFK and a woman sitting very still in the harsh airport light, her hands on her bag handles, not asking anyone for anything. He thought, of all the flights I've ever almost taken. The elevator reached 34. The doors opened. He walked back into the work that needed doing, carrying something new alongside it. Something that didn't have a name yet, but that sat in his chest with the particular weight of things that are going to matter for a long time. The train back to Ohio left Penn Station at 7:03, and Hannah sat in a window seat and watched Manhattan disappear behind her. The tunnels first, then the flat industrial stretch of New Jersey, then the gradual opening of the landscape into something wider and less certain of itself. She had her laptop open, but wasn't looking at it. She was looking at the dark window and the occasional light streaking past and thinking about what she'd said in the lobby of that building on Park Avenue. Not impossible. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn over something you've said before. You were fully sure you meant to say it, checking it from different angles, looking for the place where it fell apart. It didn't fall apart. That was the thing. She'd meant it with the same directness she meant everything, and it sat in her chest with the particular steadiness of a true thing rather than the anxious flutter of something said because the moment required it. She was also aware, with the clear-eyed practicality that had gotten her this far, that meaning something and knowing what to do with it were two separate problems. She was starting a fellowship in Los Angeles in January. He ran a global company from New York and had a 7-year-old daughter in Connecticut. Neither of them was in a position to reorganize their lives around something that was, at this precise moment, a conversation in a lobby and a cup of coffee in an airport terminal and the memory of her fingertips on his arm somewhere over Arizona. She was also aware that she was getting 40% ahead of herself, which was a habit she generally kept under control. She opened her laptop, closed it again, looked at the window. Her phone buzzed. "Damien, safe on the train?" She smiled at the screen for a second before she could stop herself, which felt embarrassing in the privacy of a mostly empty train car. She typed back, "Yes, 7 hours of New Jersey and Pennsylvania ahead of me." He replied, "Glamorous." She wrote, "It has its moments." Then, after a pause, "The Whitfield numbers came through?" His reply took a few minutes. When it came, it read, "Yes, Western Regional signed off on the revised terms tonight. Merger is moving forward." And then, after another brief pause, "You should know that Devers said, and I'm quoting directly, 'That woman is either going to save your company or destroy it, and either way, I want her on retainer.'" Hannah read it twice. Then she wrote, "Tell Devers I have a fellowship start date and no interest in corporate law." He wrote back, "He knows. He said it anyway." She put the phone face down on the tray table and looked at the ceiling of the train car, and the smile that crossed her face this time she didn't try to stop. She spent the last 2 weeks of November wrapping up her work at Riverside Urgent Care. She gave Dr. Osei 4 weeks' notice instead of 2 because she was that kind of person, the kind who considers what she leaves behind as carefully as what she's moving toward. She trained her replacement, a young woman named Tanya, who had just finished her certification and was quietly terrified, and Hannah spent her last week making sure Tanya knew not just the tasks, but the things underneath the tasks, which patients needed extra time, which insurance companies had the fastest appeals process, which doctors in the building responded well to directness, and which ones needed to be handled more carefully. "You're giving me a lot," Tanya said on her last day, looking slightly overwhelmed by the binder Hannah had assembled. "I'm giving you what I needed when I started," Hannah said. "I didn't have it, that's why I made it." She packed up her desk on a Friday afternoon in late November, said goodbye to Pam at the front desk, and walked out of the clinic into cold Delwood air for what she understood was probably the last time in a professional capacity. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The pharmacy next door had its holiday lights up. A kid on a bike went by wearing a jacket too thin for the weather. The laundromat had its door propped open and warm air drifted out, carrying the particular smell of dryer sheets and industrial detergent that she associated with the 2 years she'd done her laundry there while her mother's washing machine was broken and she couldn't afford to fix it. She'd spent a lot of years on this block. It had not always been kind to her, but it had been real, and there was something in that worth acknowledging before she walked away from it. She walked to her car. She drove home. She started packing. December moved differently than most months. She gave notice on the apartment. Mrs. Kwan received it with an unexpected practicality that revealed she'd been half expecting it, and then, more unexpectedly, reached up and patted Hannah's cheek with one dry hand and said, "Good. You stayed too long already," which was the most direct expression of affection Mrs. Kwan had ever offered in 4 years of adjacency. Hannah found it nearly undid her. She put most of her things in storage. She gave Renee the boxes that didn't need storing, including their mother's cookbooks, and the set of dishes that had been in the family since before Hannah was born. Renee came over on a Saturday morning to help sort through it all, and they spent 6 hours in the apartment doing the thing that sisters do, deciding, arguing mildly, remembering, deciding again, drinking cold coffee, and crying twice at things that were not particularly significant on their own, but that carried the weight of everything adjacent to them. "You're really going," Renee said, sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, a mug in her hands. "I'm really going," Hannah said. L.A. Renee said it like she was testing the shape of it. "For 2 years." "And then?" Hannah looked at her sister. "And then I'll know more than I know now. That's as far as I've planned." Renee looked at her for a moment. "What about Damien?" They hadn't talked about him since the Monday of the board meeting, which Renee knew about in the broad strokes but not the specific texture. Hannah had kept that part closer to herself, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't yet have language for it that felt accurate. "I don't know," she said. "That's not a Hannah Pierce answer," Renee said. "Hannah Pierce always has an answer." "Hannah Pierce is learning that some things don't have answers yet," Hannah said, "and that's allowed." Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom would like him, from what you've told me." "She would have interrogated him for 3 hours and then declared him acceptable," Hannah said, "which is what she did with every person she liked." They both laughed. It was the good kind, the kind that has grief somewhere inside it but isn't stopped by it. Damien called on a Sunday in mid-December, which was unusual. They had settled into a pattern of texts, irregular, real, often brief, occasionally longer in the late evenings when the day had wound down enough for something more than logistics. An actual call was different. She answered on the third ring because she'd been pulling tape off a box and her hands were slow. "Hey," she said. "Hey." A pause. "Are you packing?" "I'm always packing right now." "How much do you have left?" "Enough?" She set the tape gun down. "What's happening?" "I wanted to ask you something," he said, "and I wanted to ask it on the phone instead of by text because I think it deserves to be asked out loud." She sat down on the edge of a box that was probably not structurally rated for this purpose, but held anyway. "Okay." "Lily has a winter break concert at her school, December 19th. It's a thing they do every year, an hour of 7-year-olds playing instruments they've been learning for 3 months. A pause. "She asked me to come." "Of course you're going to— She also asked if I was going to bring my friend," he said. Hannah went still. "Your friend." "Apparently I mentioned you. At some point, more than once." He said it with a flatness that suggested he was mildly embarrassed by this, which she found unexpectedly endearing. "She put it together that I have a friend who is a woman and who does not live in New York, and she asked if you were coming to the concert." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd ask." Hannah sat on the box and looked at the half-empty apartment around her. The bare shelves, the walls with their rectangular shadows where pictures used to hang, the stack of filled boxes that represented the portable edition of her life so far. "Damien," she said. "You can say no," he said. It's a big ask. I know that." "What does she play?" Hannah said. A pause. "What?" "Lily, in the concert. What instrument?" "The violin," he said. "She's been learning since September. She's—" A pause that had something helpless in it. "She's not very good yet. She would tell you that herself. She practices every day and she's improving, but she would be the first person to tell you that she is not currently a good violin player." "Does she like it?" "She loves it," he said. "She practices in her room with the door closed and she comes out with this expression." He stopped, like she's been somewhere else for an hour. Hannah listened to the quality of his voice when he talked about his daughter, the specific unguarded warmth of it, the way the careful management he applied to most things simply didn't apply here, the way Lily existed in him as a kind of constant ambient light. She thought about what her mother had said a week before she died, about being so capable that nobody ever tries to take care of you. She thought about Lily, 7 years old and practicing violin with the door closed, coming out with that expression. She thought about the train ride back from New York and the dark window and Not Impossible sitting in her chest like something with roots. "I'll be there," she said. She drove to Connecticut on December 19th. She hadn't told Renee where she was going. She'd said she had something to do before heading to Los Angeles, which was true, and Renee had given her a look that suggested she understood exactly what kind of something it was, and chosen, wisely, not to press. The school was in a small town 40 minutes north of the city, the kind of place that had existed for long enough to have the specific settled confidence of old New England, stone walls and bare December trees, and a village green with a flagpole. The school itself was brick and sprawling and had the comfortable permanence of an institution that had been doing what it did for 100 years and planned to continue. She parked in the visitor lot and sat in her car for a moment. She was wearing the charcoal blazer, the one she'd worn to the Meridian interview, over a dark red shirt, which was the closest thing she had to a winter concert outfit that wasn't also a business outfit. She'd driven up from Delwood that morning, which was 9 hours, and her back registered the complaint. She checked her phone. A text from Damien. "We're inside, second row on the left. She can see the door from where she's sitting." Hannah read that last sentence twice. Then she got out of the car. She found them in the second row. Damien stood when he saw her come in, which she hadn't expected. He was wearing a dark coat and no tie and looked like someone who had made a specific effort to appear less formal than usual, which she found she could see through immediately and which charmed her anyway. "You drove," he said. 9 hours, she said. He looked at her with an expression that had something in it she didn't immediately name. Then he stepped slightly aside and said, "Hannah, this is Lily." Lily was small for 7, with her father's dark eyes and the particular stillness that Damien had described, the careful watching quality of a child who is taking in more than she is giving out. She was wearing a dark green dress with white tights, and her hair was in 2 braids that had the slightly irregular quality of braids done by a father who was doing his best. She was holding a violin case in both hands and looking at Hannah with the direct, unapologetic assessment that children deploy before they've learned that staring is considered impolite. "You're Hannah," Lily said. Not a question. "I am," Hannah said. "You drove 9 hours." "I did." Lily considered this. "That's far." "It is," Hannah agreed, "but I wanted to hear you play." Something moved across Lily's face, not quite a smile yet, more the precondition of one. "I'm not very good," she said, exactly the way Damien had said she would say it. "Your dad said you love it," Hannah said. "That's the important part." Lily looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at her father with the expression of someone delivering a verdict. "I like her," she said. Damien looked at Hannah. Hannah looked at her shoes for half a second. "Good," Damien said. "Go line up with your class." Lily went. Hannah sat down in the second row, and Damien sat beside her, close enough that their arms nearly touched, and the auditorium filled with the noise of parents and siblings and grandparents arriving, and the particular electric anticipation of a room full of people about to watch children do something they've been working on. The concert was exactly what Damien had promised. An hour of 7- and 8-year-olds playing instruments they had been learning for 3 months. The cellos were earnest and imprecise. The flutes were enthusiastic. The violins were variable. Lily was in the 3rd row of the violin section, and when the piece began, she played with an intensity of concentration that was almost physical. Her small body entirely committed to the instrument, her brow furrowed, her bow arm working with the focused effort of someone who is holding a difficult thing together through sheer will. She hit most of the notes. She missed a few. At one point, she recovered from a mistake with such seamless determination that the woman in front of Hannah whispered to her husband, "Oh, that one's going to be fine," without knowing whose child she was talking about. Hannah watched Lily play and felt something she hadn't expected, something uncomplicated and warm, settling quietly in her chest without drama or announcement. She didn't try to name it, she just let it be there. Damien was watching his daughter with the expression she'd seen once before, on the plane, when he talked about Lily coming out of her room after practicing. The ambient light thing, present and unguarded, and entirely his. When the concert ended, Lily found them in the lobby and submitted to being hugged by her father with the specific tolerance of a child who has feelings about public displays of affection, but also clearly wanted the hug. Then she stood in front of Hannah. "Did you hear when I messed up?" she asked. "In the second piece?" "I heard you fix it," Hannah said. Lily considered this framing. "I practiced that part 40 times, she said. "The fixing part." "It showed," Hannah said. "Do you play anything?" "No," Hannah said. "I never learned." Lily looked at her with the frank problem-solving orientation of a child encountering a solvable issue. "You could learn," she said. "It's hard at first, but then it gets less hard." "That's true of most things," Hannah said. Lily nodded seriously, as if Hannah had confirmed something she already suspected. Then she looked at her father and said, "Can we get food? I'm hungry. I've been nervous since this morning, and I forgot to eat lunch." "You forgot to eat lunch?" Damien said. "I was nervous," Lily said, with the dignity of someone who finds this self-evident. They went to a small Italian restaurant in the village that clearly knew Damien by name and seated them in a corner booth without being asked. Lily ordered pasta and ate it with the focused enthusiasm of someone working through a caloric deficit, and between bites, she asked Hannah questions with the patient, systematic thoroughness of a child conducting an interview. Where was Delwood? What was Ohio like? Why healthcare administration? Did she like Los Angeles? Was L.A. far? How far exactly? Was 9 hours far to drive? Did she drive a lot? What kind of car? What color? Hannah answered every question directly, which Lily seemed to appreciate in the way that children appreciate adults who don't modify themselves into a different register when they're being addressed. "Daddy said you helped someone on the plane," Lily said, arriving at this item in her internal list. "2 people, actually," Hannah said, "on different occasions." "Were they scared?" "Yes," Hannah said. "But they were also fine." Lily poked at a piece of penne thoughtfully. "My teacher says that being brave and being scared are the same thing." "Your teacher's right," Hannah said. "Daddy says that too." Lily looked at her father. "Do you think Hannah's brave?" Damien looked at Hannah over the top of Lily's head. "Yes," he said, "considerably." Lily seemed to file this. Then she went back to her pasta, and the conversation moved to other things. Lily's violin teacher, whom she described with the specific mixed feelings of a child who both respected and was slightly afraid of an instructor, and a girl at school named Priya, who was her best friend except when she was her worst enemy, and a book she was reading about animals that live in the deep ocean, which she explained at length and with genuine passion. Hannah listened and asked questions, and Damien mostly watched his daughter talk with the expression of a man who had been waiting a long time for his table to feel this full. After dinner, in the parking lot, while Lily was occupied with an urgent investigation of something she'd spotted near the base of a lamppost, Damien and Hannah stood a few feet apart in the cold December air. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking," she said. A pause. Their breath made small clouds in the cold. The parking lot was quiet, most of the restaurant's other patrons still inside. "January 15th isn't far," he said. "No," she said. "It's not. Los Angeles is 3 hours behind New York." "I know how time zones work," she said. "I'm just saying that 3 hours is manageable," he said, "for phone calls. If someone wanted to, for example, call someone." She looked at him. "Are you negotiating?" "I'm stating logistics," he said. "There's a difference. I've been in enough of your meetings now to know that when you state logistics, you are usually making a point about something else." He almost smiled. "Maybe." She looked at him for a moment, at the parking lot light falling across his face, at the tiredness around his eyes that never quite went away, at the something underneath all of it that had been there since the first night in the terminal, the thing she'd recognized without naming. "Damien," she said, "I'm not going to disappear." He held her gaze. "I know. But I need to do this," she said. "The fellowship. I need to be in it completely, not with half my attention somewhere else. That's not who I am." "I know who you are," he said. And the way he said it, flat and certain, not as a romantic gesture, but as a simple acknowledged fact, landed differently than any more elaborate thing could have. "So we do this slowly," she said. "Whatever this is." "Slowly," he repeated, like he was trying on the word. "Can you do slowly?" she asked. You strike me as someone who is used to deciding things and moving. I am, he said. It's a significant personal flaw. It's not a flaw, she said. It's just something to work on. Lily appeared at Damien's elbow. What are you talking about? Logistics, Damien said. Lily looked between them with the ancient evaluating intelligence of children who understand more than adults account for. Are you going to come back? She asked Hannah, bluntly, without preamble, the way children ask the thing everyone else is working around. Hannah crouched slightly so she was closer to eye level. Yes, she said. From Los Angeles? From wherever I am, Hannah said. Lily looked at her for a moment. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone who has received satisfactory information and is prepared to move on. Then she took her father's hand and said, I want hot chocolate. Can we get hot chocolate? There's a place 2 blocks down, Damien said. With the marshmallows? With the marshmallows. Lily started walking, pulling Damien by the hand, and he glanced back at Hannah over his shoulder, and she fell into step beside him in the cold December dark. And the three of them walked down a quiet Connecticut street toward hot chocolate, and the conversation shifted to things that required less weight, whether marshmallows were better large or small, which Lily had opinions about, and the deep ocean animals, which she returned to because there was apparently more to say about them. The year turned. Hannah arrived in Los Angeles on January 13th, 2 days early, because she was constitutionally incapable of arriving just in time for anything. She found a sublet in a neighborhood west of Westwood, a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a building with a jacaranda tree in the courtyard that was bare in January but that the building manager told her would be covered in purple flowers by April. She put her things away with the practiced efficiency of someone who had moved enough times to know exactly what mattered and what could wait. On January 14th, the night before her first day, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and called Renee. You ready? Renee asked. I think so, Hannah said. You're not nervous? Hannah looked around the small apartment, the boxes she'd half unpacked, the view from the kitchen window that was a parking structure and the top of the jacaranda tree and a strip of the California sky, still orange from the sunset. Yes, she said. But it's the right kind of nervous. Mom's kind of nervous, Renee said. Yeah, Hannah said. Exactly that kind. She called Damien after she hung up with Renee. It was past 10 in New York, which meant Lily was asleep, which meant he answered from what sounded like somewhere quiet. His study, maybe, the particular acoustic quality of a room with books in it. First day tomorrow, he said. First day tomorrow, she said. You're going to be extraordinary, he said. You don't know that. I watched you talk a boardroom full of financial executives into reconsidering their assumptions without raising your voice, he said. I'm fairly confident about the fellowship. She smiled at the kitchen table. Damien? Yeah. Thank you, she said, for the seat on the plane, for staying out of it, for all of it. A pause. Thank you for the coffee rule, he said. What coffee rule? You wouldn't take it until it wasn't a gesture anymore, he said. Until it was just 2 people in an airport. I think about that. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very thoughtful thing to have noticed. I notice things, he said, when they matter. They talked for another 30 minutes, not about anything significant, just the day's small inventory. He'd had a call with the London team. Lily had gotten a better grade on the math test, which she'd finally admitted to. There was a new book about deep-sea animals that he'd ordered for her, which he suspected she'd already read the summary of because she'd mentioned 3 specific facts about anglerfish at dinner that were suspiciously detailed for someone who claimed to be waiting for the book. Hannah lay on her back on the floor of her new apartment, the furniture situation was partial at best, and looked at the ceiling and laughed at the anglerfish story, and the laugh felt good in the empty room, filling it up a little. Get some sleep, he said finally. You have somewhere important to be tomorrow. Good night, Damien, she said. Good night, Hannah. She lay there after she hung up, phone on her chest, the California dark pressing soft against the windows. She thought about Gate 14. She thought about the fluorescent lights, and the plastic chairs, and the cold coffee, and the way she'd been sitting that night with her hands on her bag handles, ready to absorb whatever came next, because absorbing what came next was something she'd been doing her whole adult life. She thought about what she'd told the Meridian panel, about watching systems fail in real time on real people, about wanting to fix the part that breaks before the people get there. She thought about Lily playing violin with the door closed and coming out with that expression, like she'd been somewhere else for an hour. The thing you get from doing something you love badly enough to keep doing it until you do it well. She thought about her mother, about the yellow sundress photograph, which was now on the shelf above the radiator in a kitchen in Delwood because she'd given it to Renee, and then thought better of it, and then given it back to Renee when she realized that she didn't need the photograph to carry her mother around. She had other ways. She got up off the floor, washed her face, and went to bed. January 15th arrived the way first days always arrive, both monumental and entirely ordinary. Hannah woke at 6, made coffee, and stood at her kitchen window watching the jacaranda tree do nothing in the gray early light. She dressed carefully, the charcoal blazer over a dark blue shirt, her good shoes, her hair pulled back. She looked in the bathroom mirror and thought, I look like someone who is supposed to be here. Then she corrected herself. She thought, I am someone who is supposed to be here. She walked into the Meridian Health Foundation at 8:45 a.m., and Richard Okafor was in the lobby, which she hadn't expected. And he shook her hand and said, Welcome, Ms. Pierce. And she said, Thank you, and meant it without qualification or complexity. The fellowship was hard. She had known it would be, and she had still underestimated it in certain specific ways. The volume of information, the speed of the professional environment, the gap between knowing something theoretically and knowing it in the actual flesh of daily practice. There were days in the first month when she came home to her apartment and ate dinner standing at the counter because sitting down felt like too much of an event, and days when she reviewed her notes at midnight, not because she was behind, but because the material was that interesting and she wanted more of it. She was also, measurably, one of the best people in the room. Not always, not effortlessly. But she brought something into every meeting and every rotation that her cohort mates, several of whom had the Hopkins and Columbia credentials Okafor had mentioned, genuinely didn't have, which was the knowledge of how a system feels from inside its failures. She said things in the seminar sessions that made the room go quiet for a moment before someone said, Yes, exactly. And then the conversation moved somewhere deeper than it had been before. Janelle Morris, the current senior fellow who'd caught her in the hallway after the interview, became something like a mentor without either of them naming it that way. She was 3 years ahead of Hannah in the program, now placed in a director role at a Meridian-affiliated network in Oakland, and she texted Hannah sporadically with information that wasn't in any official materials and advice that was blunter than anything the formal structure offered. In March, Janelle texted, You're going to get offered a research project by Strauss. Take it even if it adds to your load. It's the one that gets noticed. Hannah took it. It added to her load. It got noticed. Damien flew to Los Angeles in February, not to see her specifically, or not only. He had a board meeting with a California hospital system that was exploring partnership terms with Ashcroft Medical Group, but he texted her the week before. I'm going to be in LA the 14th and 15th. If you have an evening. She had an evening. They went to a small restaurant in Santa Monica that Marcus had apparently found and booked without Damien asking, which she teased him about, and he didn't deny it. And they ate at a table by the window with the ocean 3 blocks away, and invisible in the dark but present somehow, in the sound and the air. They talked for 3 hours, not about the fellowship or the company or any of the complicated public events of the previous months, about Lily, mostly, and about Hannah's research project, and about the things she'd learned in her first rotation about hospital intake processes that had made her genuinely furious, which he listened to with the focused attention of someone who was also in the business of hospitals, and who found her fury both useful and, she suspected, quietly compelling. He walked her to her car afterward. They stood on the sidewalk in the mild February evening, the coastal air carrying that particular California quality, soft and slightly salt-edged, unlike any other night air she knew. This is good, he said. He meant the evening, but he might have meant the larger thing. It is, she said. She meant both. He kissed her, once, briefly, The way people do when they've been careful for a long time and are now finally being less careful. It was not cinematic, it was just real and warm, and it tasted like the last hour of a conversation she didn't want to be over. She drove home and sat in her car in the parking structure for approximately 2 minutes doing nothing, and then went upstairs and texted Renee. Something happened. Renee's response was immediate and involved several emoji and the phrase "I knew it" written 3 times in a row. The year continued. Spring arrived in Los Angeles the way it does, gradually and then suddenly, the jacaranda outside her window exploding into purple in April, exactly the way the building manager had promised. She photographed it and sent it to Lily, who sent back a voice message describing it as very purple, almost too purple, but acceptable purple, which Hannah played twice. She and Lily texted sometimes. This had developed organically over the winter months. Lily would occasionally send her a fact about deep-sea animals with no preamble or context, and Hannah would respond with a question, and Lily would answer it, and that was the whole exchange. It was, Hannah thought, exactly the kind of friendship she'd have expected Lily to offer. Precise, unsentimental, and entirely genuine. In May, Damien came to LA again. In June, Hannah went to New York for a fellowship alumni event and spent a Saturday with him and Lily at a museum that Lily had been wanting to go to for months, which involved 3 hours of exhibits about ocean ecosystems, a theme that surprised neither of them, and lunch at a food court where Lily ordered a grilled cheese and ate it with the dedicated focus of a professional. On the way home in the car, Lily fell asleep in the back seat with her head tilted against the window, and Hannah looked at her in the rearview mirror and felt the quiet, unnamed thing in her chest settle into something with more weight and more permanence than it had carried before. Damien saw her looking. "She does that," he said quietly. "Falls asleep in cars, always has." "She's a good kid," Hannah said. "She's a great kid," he said. "She's also exhausting and occasionally unreasonable, and she has very strong opinions about marshmallow size." "Qualities that will serve her," Hannah said. "That's what I keep telling myself," he said. They drove through the city in the summer evening light, the streets lit gold, Lily asleep in the back, and it was not a perfect moment. Damien had his phone face up on his knee, the reflex of a man who had never fully learned to be off duty, and Hannah had a headache from the museum air conditioning, and the traffic was bad and had added 30 minutes to what should have been a 20-minute drive. It was just a moment, an ordinary, specific, real one. Those were the ones that lasted, she was learning. Not the cinematic peaks, the ordinary ones, accumulated over time, that built the thing you were actually living. November came around again. 1 year. Damien called her on the morning of the 19th, which was the anniversary of Gate 14, though neither of them had explicitly marked it as such. "I'm at JFK," he said. She was at her desk in the Meridian offices, halfway through a briefing document on patient navigation systems in rural networks. "Why are you at JFK?" "I have a flight to London at 2, but I came through Terminal 4. A pause. "Gate 14 is being renovated, for the record." She put down her pen. "You went and looked." "I happened to be nearby," he said. "Damien." "I'm a busy man, Hannah. Sometimes I am near airports." She laughed. It filled her small office. Through the glass wall, Janelle Morris, passing in the hallway, glanced in and raised an eyebrow. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Gate 14. About a few things." He paused. "Your fellowship ends in January, 8 months. I know when it ends. I'm not trying to plan your life," he said. He stopped, started again. "Lily asked me last week if you were going to live closer when your fellowship was done." Hannah was quiet. "I told her I didn't know," he said. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "You should ask her, Dad. That's how you find out things." Hannah closed her eyes for a second. "She's right," she said. "She usually is," he said. "It's humbling." A pause. "Damien, ask me." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it got when he was saying something real instead of something managed. "When your fellowship is done," he said, "I'd like you to be somewhere closer. Not because I'm telling you where to be, but because I don't want to be 3 time zones from you anymore. And I don't want Lily to be 3 time zones from you anymore. He paused. And because I have spent a year watching you become something remarkable from a distance, and I'd rather watch it from closer. Hannah looked out the window of her office at the Los Angeles afternoon. The pale sky, the palm trees, the particular quality of California light that she had learned to love without ever quite forgetting that it wasn't hers originally. There's a Meridian-affiliated network in New York, she said. They've been building out their administrative infrastructure. Okafor mentioned it in February. Said they'd be looking for someone with clinical operations experience and systems-level thinking. A pause. You've been looking into it. I do my research, she said. I always do my research. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. She could almost hear him smiling. Hannah Pierce, he said. Damien Ashcroft, she said. Come to New York, he said. I'm working on it, she said. She hung up and sat at her desk for a moment with her hand still on the phone, looking at the briefing document she'd been reading, which was about the systems that existed between patients and the care they needed. All the complicated, invisible infrastructure that either caught people or failed them. The work she'd chosen. The work she understood in her bones because she'd lived on both sides of it. She thought about the night in the terminal, about sitting in the hard chair with her hands on her bag and the bad news settled somewhere in her chest, and the sense, not despair exactly, but something close to it, that the world was going to require from her, as it had always required, more than she had been set up to give. She thought about a man she didn't know sitting down 2 seats away and not saying the easy thing, not offering pity, just sitting down, staying. She thought about what she'd come from and what she was building and the distance between those two things, which was not something that had happened to her, but something she had done, incrementally and stubbornly and at considerable personal cost, over years of choosing not to give up on herself when it would have been far easier. The thing nobody tells you, she thought, the thing you have to figure out on your own, is that help and self-sufficiency are not opposites. That accepting a cup of coffee from a stranger is not the same as losing something. That letting someone sit beside you in the dark does not make the dark any less something you faced. She had faced it. She was still facing it, and she would keep facing it, because that was simply who she was. But she was also now not facing it entirely alone. That felt like something. That felt like a great deal, actually. It just didn't make noise about it. She picked up her pen and went back to the briefing document. Outside, the jacaranda tree she could see from the corner of her window was beginning to lose its flowers, purple petals falling slowly in the afternoon air, entirely unconcerned with how the story was going to go. It was going to go fine. Better than fine. It was going to go the way things go when the people involved are honest with each other and willing to do the work. And that, Hannah Pierce had always known, was enough to build something real on.